welcome to this new panel of independent thought. Today we are talking about the rise in gas prices across, well, basically the world right now, right? It's not just the US. Don't want to make this just a US thing. Gas prices are rising. We're here to talk about what exactly is going on with it. Have a great panel of 7 other people today here. I had to check really quickly. I have a lot of people on this panel. And so we're just going to start in really quickly with everyone's introductions. Then we're going to get right into the topics. So first, to my left here, Fresh Faces, New Ideas. Tell everyone a little bit about yourself and your political leanings.
Hi, I am Fresh Faces New Ideas. I am a Democratic Socialist. I am a Bernie bro. I usually stream. I attempt to stream 3 days a week, but it's usually Monday. Monday around 7:30 p.m. EST, and then I try to do like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. But it varies based on how I feel and work. But yeah, you can find me at twitch.tv/Fresh Faces New Ideas and on Twitter at Faces Ideas.
All right, thank you so much. Next, we're gonna go over to my right, Jebtan.
Hey, how's it going? I'm Jebtan. I mostly just hop on panels. I'm available on Twitter at JebtanRIP. I lean more conservative libertarian. I don't really take the Republican mantle, though that is the party that aligns with more of my policy prescriptions than the other one.
All right, thank you so much. Next, we're gonna go down to Endless Cemetery.
What's up, y'all? I'm a Black Anarchist. You can find me at endlesscemetery.com. I stream to YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, Trovo, a bunch of different places. I mainly just talk about like police abolition and all that sort of fun stuff, and play video games. I play Mortal Kombat 11. I'm one of the best Jax players in the planet. And sometimes I talk about and play music. And yeah, that's about it.
All right, thank you so much. Next, we're going to go to Frackle.
I'm Freckle. I'm a socialist and abolitionist and video essayist. And my background and why I'm a little bit passionate about this particular subject is in transportation planning. So yeah, that's me.
All right, thank you so much. Next, we're going to go down to Daniel Wilson.
Awesome. Hello, everybody. Daniel Wilson here. I'm running for California State Assembly in District 38. Running fully nonpartisan. I believe that the political parties are the problem and a barrier they inherently subvert the will of the people. So I'm running fully nonpartisan and corporate free, so that there's never a corporation or a party standing between me and the constituents and what we need. You can go to votefordaniel.com to check it out. So my political leanings: fighting for cow care, fighting for everybody. It's what the people want, what the people need, rather than the donors and what the party dictates.
All right, I love it. Next, we're going to go over to Carr.
Hey, everyone. I am Carr. I make Black anarchist content on YouTube. I'm a Black anarchist, and I'm a father and lover of guns and whiskey and ranting about politics. I make political commentary video essays on the internet, and sometimes I do the occasional stream, and I can also be found on Facebook. I try to make sure I reach out to the rest of us older millennials on Facebook as well.
Hey.
So.
All right, and finally, No Justice.
No Justice. I'm a Marxist. I stream on YouTube and Twitch. As the handle you can see there, I pointed the right way the second time. I talk about like trans issues. I like to critique current events from through the realm of like capitalist cultural hegemony, right? And talk about the way that shapes the discourse, the way that shapes how we talk about ideas and issues, and how that has changed over the course of time with the advent of neoliberalism, etc., and things like that. I like to say incentive structure a lot. You'll hear me say that a lot.
All right, thank you, everyone. We're going to jump right into the questions now. So for the very first question that we have is, who is to blame for the rise in gas prices? Now, I know this is actually a pretty complicated question, if we're actually going to break it down, which I'm hoping we're about to break it down. But I know that a lot of people who are just semi-familiar with politics might be just wondering, why the fuck are my gas prices going up? You are allowed to curse on the stream, by the way, if you didn't know. And they want to know what the hell is going on. So we're going to talk about it a little bit. So for our first take, I actually want to go over to my right with Jebtan. I want you to go ahead and start us off. Who is to blame for the rise in gas prices?
So, I mean, there are a few different factors at play always with oil. You have to think about OPEC setting the prices, right? So that's where we should first look for context on gas prices is that OPEC sets them, but that doesn't mean that the buck stops there. There are multiple things that specifically an American leader can do to mitigate fuel prices set by OPEC in the United States. Obviously, those are the amount of oil we're putting out, the amount of prospective oil we will be able to put out later, which allows us to, deploy more strategic reserves in times of war, like with Russia. And it's possible for it not to be the blame of the president when the gas prices begin to rise, but become the blame of the president when they continue to rise and nothing is done about it, or adverse actions are taken that actually make us more vulnerable to the OPEC fuel price increases, which is kind of what happened at the beginning of the Biden presidency when he suspended fuel leases and he, to a lesser extent, canceled the Keystone XL extension of that pipeline. Though it's important to stress that's become a right-wing talking point that was the big no-no, and that's a myth because it wasn't going to be complete until 2023. But the suspension of leases and then now using the excuse that there's 9,000 fuel leases open is leaving us more vulnerable, because now that leases aren't being suspended and it seems he's open to more fuel leases on public lands, the actual fuel drilling permit process can take as long as a decade. So basically, oil companies have their hands tied right now and can do nothing to mitigate the fuel price increase that has now been exacerbated by Russia and the conflict over there and our ban on Russian oil, which was a good thing, a good step to take. And no action seems to be in play as far as reducing that regulatory process and making sure that fuel prices can go back down and our fuel output can at least temporarily go up.
All right. I forgot to mention this just a little bit ago. We are going to have everyone do their opening statement, and then we'll go to an open panel. Try to keep your opening statement around a minute or so. Next, we're going to go to Endless Cemetery.
I blame the oil and gas executives because they kind of set the prices. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it at that.
All right. Short and sweet. I like it. Frackle, you're next.
So since I have to stick to a minute, I'm gonna stay brief and I'll wait till open panel. But I'm actually coming in with the controversial perspective that gas prices are actually criminally low, and there are extremely damaging global impacts as a result of that. And this is something that goes back through the 1850s. With a series of policy decisions, many of which were intended to be temporary, but have become permanent. And yeah, I'll elaborate more in open panel.
All right. Next, I want to go down to Daniel.
I would say the oil execs, and then, but obviously our politicians. I think the biggest failure is that we've wasted decades not shifting to green or sustainable or renewable energy, so that this even has an impact on us. If we were manufacturing our own forms of fuel that we needed to survive and power things, then we wouldn't be as impacted by the things going on in the global economy.
All right. Next, we're going to go over to Carr.
Thank you. I would actually like to echo something that was said earlier. I think that in no small part, the actual price that we're seeing at the pump is to blame mostly from those running the oil companies, running our domestic oil companies. So the oil executives or their boards of directors or whatever, their executives, their boards, whomever is calling the shots, because they are still pocketing record profits year over year over year over year. And every time they tell us, oh, here's a crisis, here's a shortage, we have to raise prices, yet they never ever stop pocketing those profits. So they always have something they can do in the best fiduciary interest of their shareholders and of their board, but no steps can ever be taken to protect the consumer. Ultimately, I would like to see fossil fuel usage abolished completely, but realistically speaking, right now, the rest of the world is still developing. So there's people who don't have access to renewable energy. So we need to have access to fuels that is equitable and controlled. I would say some of the blame is on OPEC as well, but not necessarily by their design, but essentially by the actions that OPEC member nations have taken over the last few years. And I would say the United States government plays a small role as well. They claim to have done a lot of future proofing on our petroleum usage, and yet it keeps coming out that we're not really doing that. So,
Okay. And next we're going to go up to No Justice.
So yeah, it's a myriad factors. I think I agree with parts of what everybody says. Obviously, OPEC have so much of a leverage in the market that they get to control a lot of how the prices, how price of crude oil fluctuates in general. The corporate greed of the people who again set the prices within the United States are also incredibly to blame. I also do agree that they aren't that high. Obviously, it's much cheaper to, like, I don't know, like gas at the pump in the United States than it is anywhere in Europe at this point in time. And it's about the same price as what it was like in 2014. So it's not exactly stratospherically high, but obviously that still has an impact at people on the bottom rung of the ladder, which is the main kind of thrust of the issues that I take. But overall, the inherent marketization of a global natural resource, so much so we engage in global block politics over who has access to the oil, is one of the biggest issues that I have.
All right. And finally, Fresh Faces, New Ideas.
I agree more or less with how No Justice put it in the rest of the panel. However, I think there's one person that we're clearly not blaming for this, and it's Dinkelberg. He's directly responsible for the oil crisis, and I think we should do better to call him out. And that's really what I have to say.
All right, we're going to go ahead and just jump into the open panel. Anyone can address anyone else's points. Keep it civil, but you can be contentious. Have fun.
Okay, let me jump in real quick because I hear, and this is a pretty standard argument. I don't blame anybody for having it because it's perpetuated pretty widely, that the oil companies are at fault and they're raising prices predatory. It's the same excuse that they've had for inflation, that it's just corporate greed. The average margin, and I used to do financials for a gas station, the average margin for fuel is about anywhere from 12 cents for a poorly run station to around, if you're really good, 30 cents per gallon of fuel. We're seeing fuel rise dollars. So even if they were to cut their margins to zero, we'd still be about $1.50 above the national average that we had only a couple of years ago. Part of it, obviously, there's COVID supply issues and things like that. But with oil was generally kept running pretty well. The idea that corporate greed is the reason why the gas prices are rising is it's just not true, because they could cut their margins to zero and we would still have a very significant problem. The primary issue in American gas prices is American leverage against OPEC, which sets the market for fuel. And you can be all about green energy and having done stuff sooner and all that, but we have to grapple with the fact that you can be for green energy and also for increasing output in the meantime so that people can afford gasoline. Because even if we got green energy to where it needed to be, where we have electrical car infrastructure everywhere, all running on green renewable energy or nuclear, which would probably be the fastest way to get there, it would still take decades for the market to catch up, because you still have single moms driving Honda Civics from like 2015 who are not going to sell those cars and buy new electric cars anytime soon. You have developing nations that don't have the ability for us to simply ship the infrastructure over to them the way we can ship oil to them. You can't, dig that electric infrastructure as easily as you can bury a fuel tank in the ground for a gas station. And I think Daniel hinted, maybe toward e-fuel technology, which is another thing that's been looked into, and like blue crude and things like that. Even if you got that to where it needed to be, again, you're dealing with a lot of legacy automotive technology that isn't going to make this overnight change that would have been needed to mitigate this being an issue. The major problem is that we don't have enough output to create leverage against OPEC.
Okay, so I want to get on a little bit of a rant myself. It'll address some of the things that Jeb said, some of which I agree with, some of which I don't think are explored fully enough. So oil prices are and have been just criminally low. It is a industry that is completely non-viable the way that it's currently handled, without excessive subsidy and tax breaks. And this is not unique to the US. Most very, modern, very capitalist nations have extreme levels of subsidizing and tax breaks for oil producers and oil sellers. To the tune, there was a IMF estimate that it's in the trillions of dollars. I think it was like $5.9 trillion. Now, it's hard to pin that down because it's not all just like direct cash payments or anything, but their $5.9 trillion estimate is all of the things that oil and fossil fuels do, not only insofar as supporting the industry, but the environmental impacts and health impacts that they have that they don't ever have to pay for, and that do have to get paid for by people. Now, if you're doing any sort of development, you normally have to pay the environmental impacts that you are having on the environment. Oil companies, not so much. So there's another impact on this. And it was mentioned that, like, what are called developing nations are unable to get the infrastructure and stuff up. That's not entirely true. It's not entirely the picture. The problem is any other country that is not part of this, we're subsidizing this industry because we're addicted to oil conglomerate, like any of these companies can compete to a completely unfair degree with companies whose governments are unable to provide those same subsidies. They actually can't do the drilling and refining and distribution of oil because they can't get the same breaks to cover all of the costs involved. So what that means is there's several oil reserves and such that these states actually can't really tap into, and they are forced to wait until a US-based or UK-based or China-based company actually moves in to exploit that resource because they have the financial backing of the state to do that. The other thing is demand. Demand is kept artificially high, especially in the United States, by undercutting every effort to produce a viable mass transit solution. It's
Rude.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's
Big
a
facts.
whole system to destroy public transit and to create an addiction to personal transportation.
So you're
this
saying Mayor
country.
Pete's not going to save us then?
No, it's Elon Musk's tunnel.
So, and
What's a train?
And I can walk through that entire process. It's real briefly. It's basically a public transportation plan gets presented. It lobbyists insist on doing a pilot project. That pilot project is designed to fail because if you are setting up a mass transit system, it has to serve the entire area, because if it's just serving between these two stops, you're not going to get a actual realistic view of the ridership. You're just going to get the very few number of trips that are in the pilot area. And that never provides a complete picture. So it inevitably says, oh, well, people don't use it, therefore, let's just pull the rug and not bother. You can see this pattern over and over and over again across many states, especially here in the US, but also in other countries as well.
Don't mean to cut you off, but I want to ask a quick question.
Sure.
I think you and Jeb Tan have both done a great job
Sure.
of explaining
Sorry.
where the system is currently, but how about more retroactively? How about why is the system so fucked in the first place? Does everyone have an idea about
Yes.
how the system got to be this fucked up, as we are currently sitting?
In the
Capitalism.
United States, it started in World War I and then was reinforced in World War II. We heavily subsidized and built in all kinds of breaks during wartime to prop up our oil industry to finance the war machine. Other countries followed suit because they were like, that's a pretty good idea. Some actually were ahead of the curve in World War I on that. However, we never removed those incentives. There are things that were put in place in 1914 that are still in place today that were intended as a temporary wartime measure. This makes sure that these companies are able to basically operate as if they are a critical wartime resource, which, yeah, it keeps the prices extremely cheap, but it's not actually realistic, and it also artificially increases like the demand by keeping it that cheap.
Well,
So
let
on
me
really
jump
quickly
in
here.
real quick.
Oh,
Yeah,
actually,
let's-
really quickly, you guys, because you guys have both kind of been in the
Yeah,
open so far.
I'll dip there.
Carr, Daniel, I saw you both trying to like pop up there for a second. Do one of you guys want to pop in and say something?
Yeah. Basically, I wanted to first of all respond to a comment made by Jeb Tan, just with a little knowledge that I have of gas stations as well. It is true, retail gas stations, the place where we're seeing these price hikes at the pump, do operate on slim to none margins for retail gas being sold. Retail gasoline, they make their money on potato chips and cigarettes and beer, obviously. So they, on a day-to-day basis, they're not really pulling much of a profit on gas. And if whoever owns that franchise or whatever corporate region decides that they want to drive users to their gas stations more, and they decide to go on to undercut the competition, then they'll start losing money on gas. But the thing to remember is that the petroleum industry is not just the retail gas stations. That is one outlet of now what's what we're talking about today, but it's not the only thing that affects the prices that we see at the pump, because it's not the only outlet for crude oil that comes out of the ground. I would say that if we are talking about real world causes to the problems that we're seeing right now, I still remember 2 years back, we literally had countries all over the world outside of the US trying to give away barrels of crude because everybody stopped driving due to a pandemic, and they literally couldn't sell it, and they tried marking it down and they still couldn't sell it, and they're
was
cutting their
negative at one
prices
point.
in half,
Didn't it
by
go
the
negative?
gallon. Yes, it went negative, and they were literally trying to offload crude to other countries just to hold it because they didn't have a place for it, and logistically it's disastrous to shut off oil wells because it takes forever to tap them again. So again, yeah, I think we can't really duck a lot of corporate responsibility in this, because some of these are the same corporations that had so much oil they couldn't give it to anybody. They couldn't even give it away 2 years ago. And we've seen historically gas shortages and gas price hikes have happened over and over throughout history. I'm old enough to remember that it happened shortly after 9/11 for a period of about 6 years. There was a 6-year spike in gas prices that took it way out of what normal rate of inflation would be. And it was kind of like weird. It was overnight. We went to the point where coming into the year 2000, it wasn't unusual to see gasoline, unleaded gasoline at $1.09, $1.10 a gallon. And I feel like I blinked and we were paying in the 2s and the 3s, and that became the normal acceptable range. And yet, despite all of that, these petrol companies did not see a blip. They didn't even see a dip in their profits, not in the slightest. And these companies, when you turn around and ask them, they will blame instability in the region, despite the fact that the Middle East is a small contributor to our foreign oil consumption. They'll blame instability, they'll blame war, they'll blame terrorist attacks, da, 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 da. At the end of the day, that's not reflected in their financial performance and in their fiscal records, because we are talking about publicly traded companies. Their records are public.
Well, so that's kind of a measure. You got to look at the mathematics. So the reason why you change prices in response to a market is to maintain volume, right? So in those moments where the price goes down really fast or the price goes up really fast, the reason it's doing that is because they are saying we need to find a price where we can sell the same volume of oil at the same margin. So the price has to change based on the demand, because basically the cost is going to go up, which means the price is going to go up. But both of those things can happen directly in relation to each other while your margin and your volume stays the same. Margin and volume is what dictates profits. So just because the price goes up really hard because of an increase in demand and low supply, and a gas station still marks the same profits, that doesn't mean they're the reason why it went up. That means the demand went up, so the price went up, and they maintained the same margin and the same volume, which And all that means is they raised the price exactly how much they needed to maintain the volume and margin that they had before. But the main driver of the price change was still the demand. People look at pricing in just a measure of supply and demand. And so they're like, well, profits should go down if demand goes down. And they say, well, no, because if demand goes down and there's too much supply, that means our cost is also going down and we're able to maintain the same margin and the same volume. That's margin and volume are what affects the retail gasoline seller or even the oil company. Demand and supply are what dictate the price, because when we were talking about a free market, what you're banking on is corporations trying to maintain or even slowly ascend in volume and or margin. But that doesn't mean that you can take this giant $2 price hike and say it's all corporate greed just because they still maintained the same volume and margin. Because
No, I understand, but they have not demonstrated this increase in demand that would warrant these price hikes and that would warrant this change. More importantly, the stronger pattern that it shows is that, okay, they say something happened in the Middle East or something happened in Russia or something happened in Ukraine. This instability has the opportunity to affect demand, or this instability has the opportunity to affect supply, right?
Supply,
These
that was
are
the big
at
one.
or supply in this case. These are at their level. These are not massive ripples that would be felt all the way down to the consumer unless they reflect it at the pump, at the retail level. The reason why I say that we are suffering in at least a large part due to corporate malfeasance is because it is an industry left unregulated and allowed to trade on the international stage. And there's no cap on how much of these fluctuations they can turn around and offset on consumers at the pump. That's my point, is that they are avoiding any fluctuations on their end by making up for it on the front end, basically the day-to-day person filling up their car. Sorry, Daniel, did you want to step in?
Yeah, Daniel's not familiar with the panel format. Daniel, just jump in. Just jump in.
Hop on.
Shout over me,
Like
because I'll
sorry.
talk over you.
Too
So just
polite
shout
and
over me.
respectful.
So a couple points. I completely agree with Carr, and I understand the points that you're making, Jeb, as far as that, you know, at the retail station, they're not making a lot of profit, but we're not talking about the retail front store when we're talking about corporate greed. We're talking about the oil executives at the very top that get these massive dividends, these massive profits, and there's no way that it doesn't correlate. Like, their profits should decrease if the price goes up, and they're not offsetting it onto us, as Carr talked about. There's also a big problem that isn't talked about enough, that number one, as Carr was starting to discuss, that we export a lot of our oil. So if we were able to keep that home, again, what's going on in Russia wouldn't affect us. Again, Russia, this whole thing of canceling our contracts with importing Russian oil is going to make our costs go up. Again, they count for less than, I think it was either 8 or 3% of our
7% of like general. But then there's another metric. I don't remember. I think it's whether they produce a large quantity for us. So there's two separate gas metrics. That one of them is 7, the other one is close to 40, I think.
Yeah, retail oil, they don't send us a lot of the oil we sell. They sell us a lot of the oil we use in our energy infrastructure.
Okay. But so still, if we were exporting less of the oil that we are pumping out of our own grounds for profits overseas, that could be used here to maintain. There's also repeatedly, and I think an article just came out about this, where it's not a supply and demand issue if they're sitting on oil and refusing to put it into the supply market so that it artificially causes prices to go up so that they can have that argument. So we have the oil that we're exporting, we have the oil that they're sitting on. So that's why we say corporate malfeasance, and it's an intentional choice by corporate greed. It's not the people, the independent owner operators at the retail front that are pocketing off of this. It's much higher than that. Retail independent owner operators, like everybody has talked about, they make money off of chips and beer and they barely survive. It's higher than that the squeeze is coming from. And so I also want to say that earlier when I was mentioning green energy and sustainable, I don't see that as a solution right now, because it like you said, it would take years for us to get there. The question was, what is the cause? And I would see the cause that if we had gotten to this earlier, we wouldn't be feeling this right now. But I don't see that as the quick way out of this right now. We should be investing in our own technology and sustainable stuff, not only to bolster our own economy so that we get the patents on the technology stuff and we could produce and manufacture here rather than letting another country beat us to that in the technological race, and then we've got to pay for it. So I don't see that as an immediate solution, as a quick fix right now to decrease gas prices. That was an answer to the question, what led us here.
Definitely.
So really
So what
quickly
am I-
here,
Oh,
we haven't
sorry.
heard Endless jump in yet between your opening statement and the panel here. So give us the anarchism take on this.
I feel like Carr's doing a pretty
Yeah,
good
Car's
job.
an anarchist.
Yeah.
The,
I was
the
gonna
Baltimore
say,
anarchist take.
Appreciate it.
but yeah, I don't really have anything too different to say. I feel the same in terms of it's always whenever these types of things happened, it's always the most vulnerable people who have to take a haircut and not the CEOs and executives who are going to make millions of dollars off the oil anyway. Like they could just eat that cost for however long, as long as it means, you know, for the betterment of all the people who need that oil for whatever things it's used for. But also, just like Daniel just said, it's not necessarily a solution in terms of where do we go from here, but like literally the reason why we're in this situation is because of all the effort that was put in to crush renewable energy and, you know, sustainable energy infrastructure. And just like Frackle was saying, oil is low-key crazy underpriced because of how subsidized it is and the artificial demand for it that's created. And
estimated cost if they received none of these tax breaks and subsidies would be about 15 USD at the pump.
Yeah,
per gallon.
So I remember here.
So the issue with that though is like we were saying, if you okay, so we got to look at this practically. One, let me hit exports because we can't mitigate prices at home through reducing exports because the issue is OPEC sets prices not based on the demand from the US. They set prices based on worldwide demand. So if the US stops exporting, we still lose that same. If we, instead of exporting that fuel, keep it here, we don't get any net gain in leverage against OPEC because OPEC sells internationally. Our exports create leverage for OPEC because they have another participant in the international market. Also, with the green energy thing, right? It's not like artificial demand, like we just wanted oil to be good, so we didn't invest in green energy. The issue was the cost benefit analysis is tricky. The cost benefit analysis is tricky because right now we're admitting, right? If we fully invest with technology as advanced as it is right now, if we fully invest in green energy, it'll still take decades for it to pan out.
Not decades. It depends on how advanced we're doing it. If we're doing it solely on something like nuclear, it'll take longer because it takes about a decade to get the huge reactors online.
No, for people to adopt it in their everyday transit, it'll take decades. I promise, because people have cars right now that'll last.
We're doing it simply by replacing cars. We can do it with transportation. We can do it through other means of.
I was going to say
that's not going to change the pump front pricing because you still have those people who are dependent on the fuel, and now you're reducing the supply of that fuel, which means prices are still going to go up for them.
No, we're going to be reducing the demand. If we switch people off of using that as a fuel source, it will lower the demand for it, which will lower the prices.
You're just saying switch
moderator
people.
Stepping in one more time. Sorry, Jeb. I feel like I keep doing this to you, but I promise it's not on purpose. No Justice, and let's go ahead and jump in here. You guys have talked the least. I want to hear some of you guys.
Yes. So I was going to say, I think that one of Frackle's main points, though, is this is a long-standing problem through incredibly difficult to solve issues that are completely inbuilt to a century of the way the infrastructure is being planned and created over time. Half of the issue with the dependence on petrol as a source of transportation, because you all have to drive cars, even the poorest people in America all have to own cars to be able to drive around, is because of horrendously poor urban planning. It's not only ugly, right? I'm not going to say I could go ranting about urban planning forever, but it also means that everywhere is unwalkable. You have to have a car. Even planning new forms of public transportation in these areas is difficult because of how tremendously awful suburbs are to navigate with regards to public transportation. It's just a nightmare mess. And I think you are right that in general, to try and fix these issues will take a very long time. And just down to a very base issue of how how cities are planned and how residential areas are planned and how people would even be able to get around without automobiles moving forward.
Right. So no, go ahead, Endless.
Oh, I was just gonna add basically exactly what No Justice said, just to add the Baltimore spice to it, because I am a denizen of both Baltimore City and Baltimore County. There's like myriad examples of like NIMBY stuff and so on and so forth of like me, I worked in a part of the county, or excuse me, I worked in the Inner Harbor and lived in the part of the county where I could take the metro from home to work. It was like an hour walk to get to the metro, but it was only like 10 minutes from my job. So in cases like that, like if I could take a train to work where I work now, I literally physically can't, because my commute would be like 3 hours, right? But it's only a half-hour drive. But there's like a million reasons why I would rather take the train to work, least of not being that it would be more sustainable simply. I feel like building that infrastructure, the difficulty comes from, like I was saying, a lot of the NIMBY vibes, because it's not as if there's a shortage of people who want that type of stuff. It's just that it's not profitable for people that might have their hands in the cookie jar when it comes to oil, big oil money, or in the case of Baltimore, that's like low-key segregated, just straight up NIMBY vibes.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Touching on the NIMBY thing. Sorry, go ahead, Daniel.
No, I just real quick. I just wanted to touch back on the, like, as Frackle talked about earlier, the targeted, intentional squeezing and destruction of any type of increase in public transit and public planning, where we can see a targeted attack to make sure that that never survives. There's also documented evidence for decades of intentional attacks on sustainable technology. So there is an intentional attack from big oil industries and big fossil fuel to make sure that certain technologies never saw the light of day. Both our federal government and private oil companies have made sure that technologies that would have saved us millions of dollars and all of this time and stress decades ago, it was squashed, and it's in a vault somewhere, never to see the light of day. So there's documented attacks on green and sustainable technology through the oil companies and stuff to make sure that they maintain the profit and the hold on it, as well as what we see in public planning. And it's a very great point, No Justice. I'm so glad that you brought that up. We're seeing that here in my own community, where we're trying to just increase bike usage, and the fight that we're getting pushback on just creating bike lanes. Like, it's not even putting buses or trains or trucks, just creating a safe place for people to ride their bikes are getting pushback. So imagine telling people that you're not going to put a train or tear this down or do that. So they've made it so hard that we can't do these things. And so there's so much intentional infrastructural blockage to growth and doing these things that would alleviate a lot of problems.
All right,
Yeah, but
everyone,
most of that is directly
sorry. Go
affecting.
ahead.
Oh, so yeah, most
Go
of that I've seen the stuff about the intentional like assassination of green energy. Even the stuff that is there, it's more about like general energy infrastructure and like public transit. But the issue that a lot of people and people keep saying like this public transit's this answer, like just get electrical or green energy public transit will be good. There's the reason why people like try to make these one-to-one comparisons to like Europe and they don't work is because we have so much landmass to cover. In a lot of places, urban planning is not going to solve it, because you're not going to get this amazing public transit infrastructure in rural Nebraska or rural South Dakota that's going to solve all the problems for people who live in towns of 1,000 people driving to another town of 1,000 people.
I don't know about that one.
Well, let me tell you
I don't know
something.
about
There's
that
this
one.
invention
China's
called
bigger than us, and they did
trains.
it.
One of the
Yeah,
most efficient means of transporting anything in the world is trains. We have proven with technology that's 80 years old that we can lay miles of track faster than we can dig fucking hyperloop tunnels, faster than we can build airports, faster than we can build more highways. We can lay miles of track. And this is not a pipe dream either. This is part of our history. We are less connected now in the continental United States than we used to be. You
Yeah,
know,
we've ripped
we
up
literally
tons of our rail
It's
infrastructure.
not
to
about
have rail
speed, though.
spider
It's
webbing
about
across
you
this
do have
country.
to think about financial viability because that comes
So-
from the
One of
tax-paying.
the most
That could be
efficient,
taxpaying
use
citizens.
extra
one of the
subsidy.
best returns on investment.
All
in
right,
terms of
everyone.
forms of
Not-
I
travel.
think
but
we're
no-
gonna
when-
actually move to our next topic here. I
Yep.
just looked at the clock.
Yep.
We've been on this first topic for a minute now. So if anyone wants to make a final point, try to keep it
I
short and
really
sweet.
do.
Push back on one point if
Okay,
I can.
Yeah, just
sorry.
keep it short and
Go
sweet.
ahead,
We're gonna go
Frank.
to the
I'll
second
finish
topic.
it
one minute
after
closings.
everyone's done.
Do 1
I'll
minute
cede.
closings.
Go ahead.
Sorry, who?
No, Justice, go ahead.
Okay, so I just want to push back. Are they just gonna like push back on that point where, well, there are these small communities in rural areas that can't really be served by public transportation? And that's true. There is a limit to what public transportation can do in these areas, but the vast majority of people in the United States live in centralized, large city communities, right? That's where the vast majority of the population is. So you fix those issues first, then cheaper gas for everybody else because the demand's gone down elsewhere. So the price has to come down to match the demand.
Okay. All right. Anyone else have a final point they want to make before we switch topics?
I feel like we
All
were
right,
just
so
we could just
Frackle
do a line of
first.
closings.
Yep.
Okay, so I wanted to add on to
They also
Endless
work in telco.
talking about
ACT are the absolute worst though.
talking about NIMBY stuff, because there's one aspect of that with our current infrastructure, and it gets away from the dollar cost. 200,000 lives per day in the United States, or per year, sorry, in the United States, or over 500 per day are lost due to health impacts that can be directly attributed to the burning of fossil fuels and natural gas. And it's not the wealthy folks living, in the nicer neighborhoods that are suffering that. Yeah, in addition to all of the financial cost, there is an actual measurable human cost to our continued subsidizing of this failed industry.
Okay. I think I saw a car. You want to go ahead and give a close really quick?
Oh yeah, sure. And I'll keep it short so I can cede to other people to have more time. And I want to get back to the original question about, what was the cause of these price increases. I think that the biggest players in my mind, it should go U.S. government and then the corporations and then to some extent OPEC. But OPEC, we're looking more at an international issue. Right now, the U.S. government should be doing its job as a government of a large country and regulating this supply so that the American citizens are not getting hurt. And they're failing at that job. They pay people a lot of money to study the market and predict these things happening. And yet they have yet to utilize their massive reserve supply or even prep it for use, because it takes 90 days to come online, to help guard against these huge price increases and these huge price spikes. So they're to blame, and they're to blame for leaving these corporations unregulated. And these corporations are to blame for passing on these market fluctuations, not to their coffers, but to the end consumer. And that's all I have on this first part of it.
All right. Thank you so much. Endless, go ahead and go next.
I just wanted to counter really quick the idea that the building the train infrastructure would be like more costly. I grew up in a place called Relay, which is like one of the first train stations in the entire country. And there's a piece of infrastructure there called the St. Thomas Viaduct, which is like the oldest still in use functional stone train bridge in the entire country. It might be the world, but I'm not entirely sure on that. So it's like, for me, it would be job creation and working towards sustainable infrastructure, but also in the long run, like I'm sure Daniel will tell you, 695, 495, 95, that shit's always busted. But they've been using that train bridge since it was built back in like the 1800s. So
All right, Dana, go ahead and go next.
I would like to second everything that everybody has said. Absolutely true. And like Endless Cemetery said, and I can't believe that I moved from one of the places with the worst traffic in our country to the second place with the worst traffic in our country, to LA. And it is, and we see even if it would cost us upfront to build this stuff, the insane amount of profits and productivity that would come from building this infrastructure is absolutely astronomical and something that we can't even comprehend. And this is something that and as far as landmass, China is doing this, and they have built trains that they are seeing record profits in just like produce, and because of how fast they can get things to market before it goes bad, and how fast they can cover distances, how fast you can get the materials to produce or to a manufacturer that needs them, so that they can make materials faster. So there's a domino effect of how positively it would benefit us to do the train infrastructure. And I completely agree with Carr. I would say it's our federal government's decisions, the oil executives that we let run amok, and then OPEC. And why does the need to maintain leverage on the international stage versus keeping our citizens and our residents able to, meet their needs? Why is that more important? The political posturing and the working class poor that suffer because of these gains is just not worth it to me.
All right. And Jeb Tansel, you had your hand up too?
Yeah. So anyway, as far as the international leverage does help the working class. Since OPEC sets the fuel price, the crude oil prices, having international leverage that forces them to lower their prices due to competition on the international scale also helps the people at home. That's why I'm saying there would be a net zero difference if you brought that oil here, because you wouldn't be creating any more leverage here than it would be anywhere else, because OPEC's an international market. As far as the public transit thing in rural areas, time and time again, people have tried to shake out the finances of actually somehow connecting every rural area in the middle of the United States together. It's ridiculous. It's astronomical. And there's no proof that it would be cost effective at all. In fact, pretty much all the proof is otherwise. And China's a terrible example because all of their metropolitan and international trade activity happens in one area of the country, and everybody else goes to and from those areas of the country. The United States is dealing with a web of interconnected communities throughout the entire nation. China, all the goods manufacturing that goes out internationally, all of their big trade happens on the coast. So it's all rural mainland China going to the coast and back. That's why public infrastructure works really well there, because everybody's going the same places. That's not the case in the United States. It's a lot more intricate in the United States, and there hasn't been anything that would shake out that financial and the financial implications of transferring all of our oil money or whatever you guys are saying toward green energy tomorrow equals 20 years of absolute havoc at the gas station if you're reducing the supply for the oil or making it extremely expensive to produce oil for the people who aren't yet adopting electric cars because they can't afford to, because you're basically saying, well, you guys can either, like Fresh Faces New Ideas said, if you switch them to new green infrastructure, then they're good. Well, that switch will take about 10, 20 years for a lot of people who already own gasoline cars and can't buy new electric cars. And so in the meantime, gas supply is either far lower or the price to produce it is far higher, and you're only jacking up the prices higher and harder on the poorest of the nation because they're the ones who can't afford to get the electric cars and just switch.
All right. I think Fresh Face, do you want a closing statement? Should we go to the next topic?
Yeah, let me just close the statement. Look, a lot of times the complaint is it costs too much upfront. Infrastructure is like always the biggest thing where they're like, we can't fix it now because it's going to cost too much. The problem with that in general, like when we're also talking about trains and shit, is it's broken anyway, and the longer you need to fix it, like to be fair, the infrastructure bill that passed, the bipartisan one, was the largest infrastructure bill in history. The carve out for the year is about enough for just New York City, period, to fix New York City. The more we pump into this now, look, there is switching the infrastructure now into from fossil fuels to green is not going to solve this problem immediately. It just isn't. We don't have enough power for it. We don't have the power lines for it. We don't have the technology for it. But it is a scalable program that the more money that you put into the R&D, the faster it can spread out, and that there's more money trapped in it. That's over and over again. They're saying, look, you give us a subsidy in this, and we're going to be able to put the resources behind it. It's the companies that do this say it. So really for this, you're right. The government right now, is inability to handle this is shocking. The fact that they weren't, like, they kind of should have known about this. Like, obviously when you're negotiating with Putin, they should have been like, hey, we don't want a war, but on the off chance that we're going to go like full nuclear sanctions on them in the way that we did, we should kind of have like a backup plan, maybe some type of war hardship UBI or something. Which, look, Andrew Yang, if he ran again on this, would actually have a point because like every single thing that happened shows that a UBI is effective. But look, the right answer right now is still Dinkelberg is the cause for all of this.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for that. I think we're going to just go ahead and switch topics. I know that there's probably, we could probably go on that topic for a lot longer, but we are going to switch because we have more topics. So our second topic for today is, should the US and the West ban Russian oil and start drilling more here in America? Well, and I guess just everywhere else, obviously. So again, opening statement, try to keep it to under a minute. And also to everyone watching, whether you're watching currently on Twitch or in the future on YouTube, go ahead and drop a comment really quickly and tell us, who do you agree with or disagree with on the panel right now? Get some comment action going. But first, our first opening statement, we're going to actually go back into reverse, fresh faces, new ideas. Start us off really quickly here, a minute or so. Should the US and the West ban Russian oil and start drilling?
Well, look,
I know that we have. Sorry,
I think the US has. I'm not sure which other countries have yet to do that, just because it's a every day is a different thing that comes up. Look, we talked about this on the other panel last week. I don't know how much more like drilling we're able to capably do in a way that would make significant differences. I think at this point, subsidies, so either for the companies to drive their prices down or directly to the American people, or some type of windfall tax that would be redistributed among the American people, or maybe we start seizing our billionaires' yachts to pay for things. That's really how we're gonna repatriate that type of stuff. It's I don't know, like the other countries, like look, the fossil fuels is bad, like just across the board. The problem with this is one of those things where like it's directly tied to a presidential approval rating, how high the gas prices is, but like they don't have the ability to really change all that much, and we can't change things without like mass like cultural change that we are nowhere near close enough to.
All right, thank you so much. Next, we're actually go down to, I guess, everyone's changing the order on me. Frackle, go ahead and go next.
Okay, sorry. My mind is still. I want to answer the question, but I have to correct this misconception about public transit. So I apologize. I really do. But okay. So there's a study in Minnesota in the United States. This is a rural state. It is in the United States. It's not comparing oranges to apples. Public transit systems serving rural areas across greater Minnesota. They studied it. Cost benefit ratio ranging from 1.5 to 4.2 for every dollar spent on public transit. The return to the community averaged around $2.5 per dollar spent on public transit in direct economic benefit. Now, to the question, sorry. Yes, we should ban Russian oil, and yes, we should stop drilling
Also,
at home.
Like way less.
Hold
like
on,
if you put in
Fresh faces, don't interrupt someone else's
Medicare
opening
prices,
statement.
like for like what's it called?
So yeah, so we definitely need to stop our absolute thirst for oil. If we started to, or if we all at once moved all of these subsidies and tax breaks that are currently invested just in oil addiction and instead put them into renewables and public transit and other areas where we rely on gasoline and oil, the economics would follow that those would immediately gain adoption. It would hurt for a couple years, but then things would be a whole lot better across the board, not only in energy like reliance and dependence on both domestic production and foreign production, but also tons of health benefits and tons of community benefits. So, and that's not even increasing spending. That's just taking the subsidies that are currently spent, propping up a failed industry and moving them towards a better system.
Okay. All right. So thank you for your opening statement. Endless Cemetery. Why don't you go ahead and go next?
Yeah, I agree that we should probably ban Russian oil, but just because I think we should abolish the oil industry altogether. I think that as a whole, the oil industry causes tremendous harm, more so than it benefits, working class people, poor people, so on and so forth. Excuse me. So yeah, my argument's kind of same as like the abolish the police argument, where it's like, of course, if we just got rid of all gas stations and oil and like ice engines and stuff like that tomorrow, it would be bad. The point is, we don't just get rid of that. We put all of that same effort and energy into things that are actually sustainable and don't have negative repercussions for people in vulnerable communities, whether we're talking about like I live in Baltimore. A lot of the soil is contaminated with lead because of leaded fuel, that type of stuff. Uh, uh, exploitative conditions for people who have to work at like fracking sites and so on and so forth, like that kind of stuff. I just feel like the elimination of the industry as a whole and moving towards something else, even if like, even if like Freckle was saying, it would hurt for the first few years, the long-term benefits would be immeasurable.
All right. Thank you so much. Next, we're going to go over to Carr.
All right, thank you. So to address the two-part question, yeah, I don't even know if it necessarily should go as a ban. I am ultimately an anarchist, so my goal is there to be less federal government in general in the end, but and I don't necessarily think there's much to be accomplished by that, even putting the energy into that, because that usually comes bundled with very, very hurtful sanctions to otherwise working poor in European nations. And a lot of European nations that do pump oil import labor from the Middle East and from the Cape of Africa and from Asia, and they're very poorly treated in those conditions to begin with. So, but yeah, we don't need Russian oil. If we, at the very least, we bring our Russian oil importing to a stop, we won't feel that at all, because I think they barely make up a single-digit % of our oil consumption in terms of foreign oil consumption. We lean much more on Canada and South American oil than we have ever seen of crude coming from Russia. They're just, I mean, I know they're a big player overseas, but they're not a big player in our oil consumption. And maybe it's a bigger issue for China, but it's not a big issue for us. So the second part of this subject is, should we drill domestically? No, hard no. I think that should we drill more domestically? No, we are already drilling quite a bit domestically. And the money, at this point, we are drilling enough domestically that whatever money, resources, and infrastructure we would be taking to tap more wells in the United States, which would ultimately be also destroying more environment, trampling on more indigenous land, or poisoning more water supplies, should instead be focused on clean and renewable energy sources. There's no reason that we can't take those funds and those resources and put it in that direction. We've been increasing our domestic drilling for quite some time, and it hasn't really made our prices any cheaper at the pump, and it hasn't really improved the lives of the people in my community or any other community. And ultimately, that's the goal. If I have to have a government, it needs to operate in service of the people, not the corporations, not the senators, not the congressmen, or not the judges. If it's not going to operate in service of the people, then it doesn't need to exist. And so more wells drilled in the ground won't be operating in service of the people. Investing in getting away from a car-centric economy and a car-cultured country and into one connected via public transit, and getting away, using this opportunity to slowly start crawling towards renewable energy, making some of those goals that we keep talking about, be it Kyoto protocols or Green New Deal, that would be a much better use. And we would see a bigger return on investment if that investment was done in good faith, as opposed to just tapping more wells.
All
That's
right.
my-
Thank you so much, Carr. Next, we're going to go up to No Justice. You are muted, my friend.
Thank you. Sorry. So with regards to not buying Russian gas anymore, gas and oil, I had a pretty kind of nuanced view of sanctions when we were looking at speaking about this previously, and I do think that moving away from Russian oil, specifically because the four biggest Russian oil companies are all in service of the Russian state, is a good thing to do, especially at the moment, as because that is what's funding the war effort. So I think that's a reasonable way of divesting without, obviously it's going to have some impact on the Russian people, which I obviously is regretful, but these things have to be done in drastic times such as these. But that's my prescription about that, because it's specifically state-run enterprises over there. Speaking of state-run enterprises, with regards to should there be more drilling in the United States, obviously with regards to domestic on-land drilling, I do think that's not something that you should be engaging anymore. But offshore drilling, I think should be something that in the meantime should be there should be an increase currently to be able to at least cover somewhat of the supply issues to decrease the cost for the working class, because they can't not drive until we have that infrastructure. They can't not drive. Right? These people can't not drive at this point in time. I'm absolutely 100% in favor of a move away from car culture. That's 100% correct. But right now, right at this point in time, there does need to be some way in which we can bring costs down for the people at the bottom of the ladder, which is just an unfortunate way the economy is structured and our class system is strata are in the United States right now. So we should engage in some offshore drilling. I would be in favor of a state-owned, rather than subsidize, just have a state-owned oil company like Venezuela does this, Norway does this, Mexico does this. Why the US doesn't do that as much as everybody else does, I have no idea. That's just a way of, instead of subsidizing, you put all that money back into the public coffers. And also buy Venezuelan oil, because they're Chad, Venezuela.
Okay. And next, I want to go down to Jeb Tan.
Yeah, so 1 second. To briefly touch on the responses to me from last time, the public transit study in Minnesota, I have seen it. It really doesn't prove anything about a massive interconnected network of the entire Midwest. It just shows that, if anything, it's a great argument for us keeping things exactly how we do them, because it shows that the public transit systems we do implement end up being very profitable. That's awesome. That's because we use pilot programs and make sure they're going to be before they are implemented. Two, there's no couple years of pain. You guys keep saying that. There's like decades of insanely high gas prices, because the moment you shift those subsidies over to green energy, gas gets incredibly expensive, and you're basically fining the poor for being poor and not being able to get an electric car for a long time. Because the faster they switch, that means they've basically been priced out of gas, which means you find them incredibly in order to get them to switch. And if they don't switch for decades, then that means they're dealing with high gas prices for the 2 decades their car would probably last if they bought one in the last 5 years. For this topic, yes, we should ban Russian oil. Again, like everyone said, it funds their war effort. We shouldn't be dependent on Russian oil anyway. Most of their interests are directly antithetical to ours, no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on. And they're committing horrendous war crimes, and we shouldn't be funding them doing so. As far as drilling at home, I do think we should increase drilling. It's not like we're going to be expanding the amount of land designated for drilling. There's over 9,000 unused land leases for oil drilling right now that have already been designated for that. However people feel about that. The issue isn't land designated for drilling. The issue is the long permit process. So I would recommend a temporary 3-year stay on the regulations for getting the drilling permit in those areas, and an adapted process that allows inspectors to come in as these companies are drilling and inspect them. That way you keep the regulatory pressure, knowing that at any day an inspector can drop in and make sure that they're doing things the right way. But we let the process go on as the drilling also goes on, so that we can get an immediate alleviation from fuel prices, not only with the oil being drilled, but also a release in our strategic reserves that we can do, knowing that we'll be able to replenish them with the increased drilling through the temporary stay.
All right. Thank you so much. And finally, Daniel, your opening statement.
I would say yes. I'm agree with everybody else on, yeah, we needed to cancel our imports of Russian oil. Funding the war effort is absolutely not cool, and we should be able to survive without reliance on their oil anyway. So yes, cut the oil. I do not think we should increase drilling, because there's a massive oil reserves that are being sat on, not only by oil executives, but by our own government withholding of our own strategic oil reserves. So we have oil that we can flood into the market to decrease the price increase so that we can and cover that cushion a little bit so that the American consumers aren't the ones covering the bandit. They're holding that oil for, because they want the price to go up. So I think we could alleviate and cushion some of the burden that we're feeling right now by releasing some of that oil or increasing the oil that is already happening at existing sites. I do not think we need to tap into, and I know you said there's already sites that exist, but if they aren't being drilled on, breaking new ground doesn't make any sense. If there's already oil rigs that are in existence and aren't running to full capacity, maybe increase that so that we are not continuing to exploit and poison new grounds and new peoples that have not been toxified by the need for oil and corporate greed. All
right. So before we go into the open, I want to just say that, obviously, just again, be civil, you can be contentious. I do want to hear everyone speak at least once. So if I feel like 2 or 3 people are kind of, going back and forth, I'll probably start calling on people just so don't be afraid to interrupt. Go ahead and anyone jump in.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I actually largely agreed with the comment made in the opening statement by No Justice, but I wanted to address part of that in saying that, and everyone else that's discussing this, I really think it's kind of a it's kind of a smokescreen to even be talking about Russian oil in terms of U.S. foreign oil consumption. Like I had said in my opening statement, I want to say we're maybe at 1% of our foreign oil consumption comes from Russian oil. Like, the fact of the matter is that the majority of our foreign oil consumption does not come from Russian oil, and it does not come from Arabic oil either. It's coming from South American oil, and it's coming from Canadian oil, and some of it's coming from Scandinavian oil, right? So yeah, we can ban Russian oil and we wouldn't really even see much of a difference. There wouldn't be much for us to make up for. So I want to make sure that we know that we already buy a lot of oil from Venezuela, and we buy a lot of oil from other countries in South America, and that right now there's a lot to be critical of Russia about, and we absolutely should be critical, but their Russian petroleum is just a scare tactic, and that's the majority. I'm hearing from Al Jazeera, they're saying 3% of our oil at most comes from Russian oil wells.
The general number I've seen is around 7. That's
so you're hearing 7.
Yeah. But no, you're right. The Venezuela really is probably the area we're going to get most from, because it looks like MBS in Saudi Arabia is going to give us the middle finger. At which point we should press charges against him for murdering an American journalist. But the advantage of Venezuela is we can actually have better relationships with Venezuela. Like, part of the other group that we were going to look into this was Iran. After last night, I'm not sure how well that's going to work. But the using other places is a way for us to alleviate some of the sanctions pressures we have on Venezuela, and it would actually help make us closer to our neighbors and solve some of the problems. Like, if you're worried about the immigration crisis, one of the ways to help solve that would us not to be sanctioning the hell out of a country that we believe is collapsing because of socialism.
A country that also fuels all of our industry with their crude oil. I agree with you wholeheartedly there, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. My main point to bring it up was to address them saying that, this is why we should consider continued drilling. We don't need to. We have other sources that we can acquire more foreign crude from without the need to drill domestically to do it. We already drill a great deal domestically. We already have a very, very good supply line to our National Reserve supply that could easily be refilled. If to bring the National Reserve online, it takes about 90 days to do it. It takes 3 months. And once it's online, the National Reserve could essentially fuel the whole country on its own, assuming every other well stopped dead. The National Reserve could fuel the entire country on its own for 30 straight days once it's online. Now, we're not even at that disaster level yet. we could totally use the National Reserve to cushion the United States against a transition to pulling more crude from South America and from Canada and from places like Norway and things like that. That was my main point. I didn't want to jump on you there, fresh face.
Yeah, I
I was just
definitely
gonna say,
agree.
I was gonna, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Mine's a really
Sorry,
quick one. I'm just going to point out the fresh faces that we should divest from Saudi Arabian oil because they're killing Yemenis. That's what
Oh
I'm
no,
gonna
no,
say.
that too. But like directly the thing, like if we're going to directly go after Saudi Arabia, I think the Jamal Khashoggi thing is a pretty good place to like directly send a warning shot to MBS that like, hey, this is don't start fucking with us, because I think it's a good like medium step. I mean, obviously the stuff that we're helping them do in Yemen is unconscionable. Like that nobody is going to defend that. I think this is a good warning shot because they're like kind of feeling themselves a little bit. Allegedly, they didn't take Biden's call. I mean, sending like a warning shot that like, hey, you're gonna fuck around with this. We have the bigger, we got the bigger dick in this one.
Okay. So I agree largely, honestly, with strategic oil reserves being released. Not in entirety, because there is, like it says, a strategic element to having those reserves. But I agree with, I don't think KAR was even suggesting that. I think he was just giving the example of how much we have in there. I think we should use it to cushion, but I also just think we need to increase production just as much as we need to become a net exporter again. I think that provides sufficient leverage to keep OPEC prices under control. And it also serves American interests to be a net exporter. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to jack up exports to make sure they're higher than what imports are right now. You can become a net exporter by reducing imports and reducing exports. However, it has to happen. We're going to have to increase production to do it. And I think we should increase production to become a net exporter, even by a 1% margin, just to show that at any point we do have the ability to keep our oil on our shores and stop taking oil from other countries at the same time in a crisis. That provides a lot of economic leverage. And we can do that without even filling the 9,000 land leases. Like Daniel was saying, we can do it just by increasing the drilling on drills on rigs that are already in place and only using, I think, 1,000 or 2,000 of the land leases that were set aside. And we could do it really easily. The issue is it's just a matter of an immediate solution. Even if you are pro green energy, this still helps the green energy initiative in the sense that you are giving the Americans a palatable solution for the next few years and ensuring them that if they do decide to vote for green energy solutions, they're not killing themselves at the pump in order to do so. Because
but it's always for the next few years. All of these policy decisions since 1850 have been temporary measures. Let's just do this to keep us going a little bit longer. Let's just keep on adjusting prices to keep prices low so we can continue using oil. Where does it end? At what point do we actually take a policy position to get off of oil? What is the proactive measure you take?
Well, the measure I'm saying isn't to just arbitrarily increase drilling. The measure I'm saying is just create a 3-year stay on the inspection process and allow inspections to go on concurrently with drilling. So you keep the regulatory pressure, but you allow them to start drilling now. It's not necessarily something that if it did go on forever, it would be that bad because we'd still be inspecting the rigs. It's just a matter of allowing the drilling to start now. That's the only thing that measure could affect.
Under that framework, where is the off ramp for oil? At what point do we stop using it?
I mean, sorry, Daniel, continue. Sorry.
Well, so I'm going to address both. So good point. So I agreed with Jeb. You were making very good points. I love what you're saying up until the point where actually Freckle jumped in as well. I think that the problem is too often it's just this band-aid that's put on something. It's like just for now, just for now, just for now, just for now. But if we legislatively mandate that at the same time that we are increasing the production on existing drilling sites, that we also at the same time ramp up R&D and productivity of green energy. Like if we put that in writing to mandate that, okay, we're only going to increase productivity for 3 years. And in that 3-year time, we're going to put that same amount of time, effort, and money into increasing our R&D for sustainable energy and mandate and actually outline an off-ramp. I think that that is where a lot of times our legislators get off the hook, is not, they intentionally don't put that down in writing. So we need to find a politician somewhere that will create a piece of legislation that will say, hey, yes, we're going to increase production on existing oil sites that are already in production, but like Jeb said, might only be working at 1, 2, even at 10% capacity. Even jacking that up to 50%, not even going up to 100% capacity, could extremely alleviate what we're dealing with right now with the squeeze. But we have to put that that bold print in there that this will only go on for a certain number of years. And while we're doing that, we're also putting the same subsidies, time, effort, and money into making sure that we go into the green energy sector.
I have a quick
This is
question
my
really
argument.
quickly here.
Okay, sorry.
We do have a politician or a potential politician on the panel right now. Is that a campaign promise that we just heard from you, Daniel?
Hell yeah. Let's make it happen.
He's state assembly too, though, so he's got a way to go through that process. California State Assembly is very fun and constrictive.
All right, no justice. Go ahead.
It's going to be a good
Well,
time. And I am actually trying to find ways to, so I can't make it a federal prom list because like everybody's pointing out, so I'm a state assembly member. I'm going to be a state assembly member. But here in California, we have a gas tax, right? So there are ways that we can, without doing anything about drilling or producing or importing, there are ways that we can legislatively reduce the price at the pump for our consumers. And I have a great plan for that. Because it's, why is it the people that have the smallest vehicles that do the least amount of damage to the roads, people like myself, like you guys keep pointing out somebody driving a Honda Civic. I've got a 2001 Honda Civic with 208,000 miles on it. I'm going to run that thing into the ground. It's also great on gas. So
same based.
Right? But so yeah, there's a lot of people like me who can't afford, to upgrade. So I understand 100% what you're saying, Jeb. But so that's where we can legislatively put our money where our mouth is and do subsidies for the car manufacturers that are creating the green vehicles so that they are less for consumers. But at the gas pump, so why is it people like me with a teeny tiny Honda Civic that is not seeing the potholes in the road, paying the gas tax, but the corporations like Walmart, Amazon, and all the other shippers that are, driving big rigs up and down our roads, destroying them, why are they not paying the gas tax? And so I'm trying to figure out legislatively how to reduce the cost on consumers here by shifting the gas tax to the corporations that are actually doing the most damage to our roads anyway. But I will also look into what I was just talking about and see how we can make that work here in California, because we do have huge manufacturing industrial capacity here in California that already exists and can either be restarted because it's been allowed to go fallow because it wasn't a valid sector, right? Like we have a water salinization plant that we created here that by the time it was running, we no longer needed it. So they stopped production and working on it. And so now it would take us another decade to get this thing running when, again, we've been in a 7-year drought. We have to stop. We keep saying we can't afford to do it now. Everybody we were talking about earlier, everybody's talks about the cost of infrastructure. They keep saying we can't afford to do it because it's so expensive. We can't afford to not do it because the longer we put it off, the more expensive it gets. So we have to invest in this stuff now, like that water desalinization plant. Okay, even if we don't need it now, we still need to invest in keeping that up and running so we can still offset the water costs for, again, low income consumers. So all of that. So yeah, let's make this legislation a reality. And we can absolutely do that here in California. Like I said, I couldn't affect national policy, but I can put legislation into my county specifically. We are a huge oil drilling county. Right next to, we are also an agricultural county. And so not only are our residents dealing with the pollution from the pesticides, but also from the drilling and all of that. And so we're getting double slammed. And then I guarantee you our food is toxicified. Not only are we eating that, but we export that. So I think if we can create legislation here in the state of California to, maintain production or increase it for now, and then also put the money into maintaining and upgrading our R&D for green energy. Thank you all for letting me talk for so long.
All right, a little rant. I think I cut off no justice before that. Go ahead, jump back in.
No worries. So, I mean, again, this is my argument for state control. Essentially, is if our issue, especially is the fact that we're spending huge amounts of money on oil subsidy, that they're taking public money to be able to generate their profits, they're creating profits essentially at the expense of the consumers and the people, and also obviously the workers who are engaged in the actual production of the oil in the first place. And then, secondly of all, by having state control of such a huge, vast section of the economy, where you can use it is specifically for the issues that we have, which is the price of oil on the consumer end for the working class. You have no alternative at the moment. Then the profits, or the speculative profits you theoretically could get from state control, can then be used to finance the future Green New Deal moving forward. And then, as we want to be able to move away from a car and oil dependent economy, that can then be mandated by the state through federal control of the oil reserves. And also means that any issues that we have with licensing, with drilling, and how much drilling that we want to do, and access to whatever existing deposits or newly tapped deposits is available, that can be done in favor of the people by the state, rather than, and also to be able to use on the world stage as well, right? As far as I'm concerned, that seems like the best course of action, instead of $22 billion, or it is, going to Exxon and Shell, putting that into the public purse.
All right. I do have a fan question here, if someone doesn't mind answering. We got someone in the chat who wants to ask a question. Basically, the question is, how do we regulate future markets where these contracts are negotiated up to 6 months in advance to alleviate the shocks of psychology and human fear? Does anyone have a take on that?
So I think futures markets can actually serve a pretty sound purpose, in that they are based on essentially allowing solutions to be made now that don't take immediate effect to still influence the price of oil now. So I don't think you need to necessarily overregulate the futures market. I think you just need to perform solutions that make sense within the futures market. So that's why I'm saying an increase in production stated now is going to affect the oil prices now, because even though that production isn't going to come right now, you're not going to just have 80 million barrels of oil the moment you start drilling. That futures market accommodates for the fact that oil is not coming for a little while, and people know when they're trading on the futures market that that's what they're banking on, is what the price of oil is going to be, which allows those sort of longer term solutions, still short term, because 6 months still isn't a ton of time. It still allows them to affect the price of oil now. Along with strategic oil reserves being released, because normally that wouldn't be very friendly to a futures market, because they're saying that puts us in a vulnerable position with oil and not having strategic reserves. Well, if we increase production and they know that strategic oil reserve is going to be replenished, it won't have nearly as much of an effect on a futures market.
Well, also another thing, this isn't directly tied to the futures thing, but it's kind of supplied to the demand thing. We've already spent the last 2 years with an idea that not everyone needs to be driving to work. So some type of policy plan that either gives corporations that are supporting their like people have to go to work. There's certain corporations that need people to go to work, like grocery stores and things like that. They obviously can't send their workers home. So some type of subsidy for them makes more sense. And then like a push to say, look, gas prices are high. It makes more sense for your company, to shut down your office for like a month and a half to help drive down the prices. We're not directly advocating for lockdowns, but if your company didn't lose any benefits, there's no reason for people to be there. Like that is a policy that, and this is like an unintended consequence of the pandemic, of this idea that Americans don't want to work hard, or they're just lazy and locked down. Like the way that we build this also goes into building cities. Like people don't need to work in the office as much. So some type of push on that level to say, look, if you're a corporation that doesn't need to have all these people coming in, and they're still producing at whatever the level there was, because you already have the metrics for that, don't have them come in. You already have the infrastructure for it. You're not losing whatever you had to set up during the pandemic, and that would help lower the cost. And then for all the actual the essential workers, we're going to give them some type of subsidy, or the corporation some type of subsidy, something like that.
That's pretty much the same thing I was saying earlier. Like, because I'm a forklift driver, so I can't really do that from home. But like, if there was a train that I could actually take, instead of having to spend 60 minutes a day and however much amount of money and gas and wear and tear on my vehicle, Or if the government was like, hey, what's up? Here's a $200 tax credit or something. Go get yourself a electric vehicle or something like that. Like, it's my money anyway. You know what I mean? Yeah, that would be preferable to, well, we're going to try and cap the price at whatever amount for oil or whatever for this amount of time so that you can get cheap oil. It's like putting a band-aid over a bullet hole, in my opinion. Like, the problem is the dependence on oil, not that oil is too expensive. That's just my take, though.
Right. I mean, but we all agree it's a most of these are band-aid solutions.
Yeah.
All right,
Right.
everyone. I'm going to jump in really quickly and just say that we're going to close up here in like a couple minutes. So if you got any final takes on this, go ahead and just jump in and get them out now.
Yeah,
I just want to say that I've been taking notes on all of this. So thank you. Keep it going. I'm adding the subsidy for allowing people to increase to purchase electric vehicles at decreased cost.
Yeah. So I, again, transportation planner background, I can't resist continuing to talk about public transit, but like literally every vehicle that you can take off the road significantly decreases demand. And yeah, if you focus first of all on urban areas and then start expanding multimodal out into more and more rural areas, you can drastically reduce the amount of consumption from the end consumers, of gasoline for private vehicles and reliance on private vehicles. And in addition to that, the hundreds of billions annually spent to prop up oil companies, if we start phasing that towards renewables and actually changing the base energy infrastructure, or if we start releasing the strategic oil reserves, what do we do with that? Do we start selling it and using all of the money used in that sale to start moving towards energy reserves? Something has to be done to actually stop the reliance on it, stop that addiction, because it's literally killing us. In the course of this panel, there will have been about 44 people who have died as a direct result in the United States to emissions from fossil fuels and gasoline burning.
Yeah, that's why also we need healthcare. But yes, to decrease our dependence on stuff that's poisoning us.
And also, it's not like Australia is like underwater right now, and that's not something that maybe we should focus on. At the very least, building like massive fucking seawalls that might help us in the future.
Well, I think I heard one congressperson say we should just take all the boats out of the ocean, and that will lower the sea level a little bit.
Yeah.
But also, yeah, climate change. All the other reason we shouldn't be doing, our effects on the environment, and yes, islands that are being put underwater. There are 2 American cities that are supposed to be underwater by 2030 if we do not change things drastically right now.
Which is a great segue to our next topic. We're actually just going to go ahead and jump right into it. Our third question for this panel is, does this rise in gas prices change your opinion at all about the Green New Deal, specifically the Green New Deal? So let's see here. I want to start with No Justice. Do you want to go ahead and give your opening statement on this?
I was 100% in favor of a Green New Deal before, and I'm still 100% in favor of a Green New Deal. Very simple.
Okay. All right. Well, short and sweet. Carr, go ahead and go down to you next.
Yeah, I would. I mean, the gas price thing doesn't change my opinion. My opinion is the same when I first heard people use the term Green New Deal, and that is that yeah, I'm in favor of it if it were actually, it needs teeth. Nothing that happens needs teeth. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it sucks that, we were pulled out of Paris Climate Accord, but the Paris Climate Accord in and of itself had no fucking teeth either. It was all voluntary. Okay. The Kyoto protocols at least had teeth, right? But we keep going to these summits and we keep introducing these things with nothing but these suggestions and these idea webs. And I'm like, hey, we have specialists who studied this shit for decades. They know exactly what needs to be done, but because we are so stuck in a morass of bureaucracy and partisan politics, no one can speak in the affirmative and authoritatively and say this needs to be done. This is a hard and fast requirement that we need to meet. This is what we have to do, period. In terms of hard dollar amounts, we need to see this percentage of public transit go up. We need to see this percentage of factory farming be reduced to cut down on methane emissions. We need to see this much of a spend down on domestic drilling. We need to see this much increase in solar panels and air farms. And the Green New Deal lacks that. It's all vagaries. It's nothing but vague suggestions. And the other issue is that the Green New Deal, I don't want it to be like the original New Deal, which was actually just a big band-aid for capitalism to stave off a socialist revolution that was brewing in the United States. The biggest crime that FDR committed was locking in capitalism for the next 4 generations. And I don't want to see a Green New Deal turn around and have everybody talking about electric cars. The solution to traffic is not electric cars. The solution to pollution is not electric cars. The solution is less cars. That is the answer, is less cars. Frackle mentioned demand going down, and I love that because induced demand works both ways. Just as you build a bigger highway, more cars will use it. You build a smaller highway, guess what? People find a way to get there without taking a car. And all of a sudden there's less cars on the highway. This has been observed around the world. So a Green New Deal that would really have me excited is one that talks about weaponizing induced demand in the other direction, one that talks about how to get less cars on the road, that one that talks about how to have less ocean liners belching out emissions going around the world, have less planes guzzling fossil fuels. And then we can talk about a sustainable world. And part of what comes along with that, and this I kind of addressing to Jeb, is that it's not, I don't think the biggest issue we're going to have is, and this is not a rebuttal, by the way, he can address it on his opening statement, but what I want to say is the biggest issue I think is not the infrastructure or logistical change or transition, it's the mental one. All right, we have to stop and think for a second about what a sustainable world looks like and ask ourselves, does a sustainable world have 2-day shipping? Does a sustainable world have same-day delivery? That hurts to ask yourself. It really does. But you think about what it takes to bring you those services that we've gained from the Internet of Things, and you need to ask yourself, if A, is that something we will die without? And if not, how hard is it to let go? So yeah, I don't like to frame these changes as being painless. Yes, it's going to be painful. It's going to hurt. When you have a disease or when you have a bacterial infection, you take steroids and antibiotics, and that shit sucks. You feel like crap, but it's doing an important job. So yeah, that's my thought on the Green New Deal.
All right, thank you so much. We're actually going to go over to Endless Cemetery next.
I don't know how I'm supposed to follow that. I just want to say real quick, shout out to Car and Frackle. Hot damn, what a stacked ass panel. But I just like what Car was saying, I would support the Green New Deal, but I wanted to have some teeth when I'm wearing my black anarchist cap. I wanted to give something more than just platitudes and future promises and essentially just kicking the can down the road. I take that cap off. I put my pro-America capitalist hat on real quick. I think that if we do more in terms of just these empty platitudes, we actually create jobs for people in the short term, but we create more sustainable culture in the long term by, like Carl was saying, you reduce you take out the rot that is car culture in America, right? And you urban plan better, right? And we kind of have company towns making a little bit of a comeback. So that's some questionable stuff there. But in terms of like everyone working in one spot, or, you know, the issue of how do people get everywhere with the train system or whatever is kind of more or less solving itself. And that's something that would kind of be worked out with that too. But Yeah, I want to support the Green New Deal, but it doesn't seem like it's enough for me. But I would absolutely love to see the government take strides in what I think is the only thing that the government should exist for, in infrastructure that serves the commons.
All right. Thank you so much. We're going to go down to Daniel next.
Fantastic and wonderful segue. Because I agree. In theory, the Green New Deal sounds great, but when you actually read the legislation, all it actually says is that it's asking Congress to agree that we have a problem that we need to tackle. There's not a lot more in it. So in theory, the idea is great. So I agree with that. We need to shift the way that we're doing things. And actually, when I was on Desmond's Independent Thought, we discussed what I support more, and something that, and I agree, so we need bills that have teeth. We need bills that are going to actually decrease our reliance on things and actually decrease the incentives for these companies to continue producing and polluting. And so a piece of legislation, it's not a piece of legislation, a proposed idea, I guess, is the Red, Black, and Green New Deal. Because a problem with our environmental pollution and degradation is that it hurts the most vulnerable the worst. So our poor, our working class, our Black and brown communities are the ones that have been targeted and hurt the most. And so when we're doing these types of policies, it can't just be changes at the legislative level as far as how we produce things. There needs to actually be reparative things built in so that the communities that have been where their water is polluted, like Flint, Michigan, why is Flint still not have clean water? Like, why have we just accepted and become okay with that? So we need to, when we write the actual legislation for whatever it's called, whether it is a Green New Deal, when they put actual bullet points down on what we are going to do, or whether it's the Red, Black, and Green New Deal, whatever name it has, there needs to be dictated reparative things for the communities that have been harmed the most by environmental racism and corporate greed. And so that's what I would support. So in theory, I support what the Green New Deal wants to do, but I think it doesn't go far enough in name or in action. And we need to, again, we can make sure that we dictate things in writing. And that's where a lot of our legislators get off the hook and get out of accountability, is because, oh, well, it's not there, so I don't have to do it. We write it down, then they have to do it. In theory, we talks about that, but that gives us more power to hold them accountable.
All right. Thank you so much. Go ahead, go over to Jeb Tan next.
Yeah, so I probably won't have too much to say on this topic because no, it doesn't change my opinion on the Green New Deal, because I thought the Green New Deal was dog shit when it came out as a 5-page piece of legislation written by people who had no idea what the problems or the solutions were. Like everybody says, even coming from people who support the ideas of it, it made no sense. Its prescriptions were either vague or completely off base or ridiculously expensive to solve some of the less important problems. And like it was a terrible piece of legislation then. It's a terrible piece of legislation now. The one thing that I would touch on is the general spirit of it too, that people have been going on. That we need to get even more militant and things like that. I just don't get, especially from the anarchists, I don't get the world that is being imagined where we're anarchists whose government controls our very ability to transport ourselves to the next city over. I don't get a future where there's no 2-day delivery or no same-day grocery delivery, but also a single mom's got to go get groceries. So does she take them all on the bus? Does she drag them onto the bus and hope they don't get grabbed by anybody bigger or stronger than her and have to lug them all the way to the bus stop, take them on the bus, lug them all the way back to her house, but she also can't get them delivered? Like, the issue with the Green New Deal is also the issue with a lot of this future thinking stuff is it's not actually future thinking. It's just making a platform off of not thinking about the practical realities of the present. It's not thinking about the practical realities of the future either, but it's like the whole brand is we have to be revolutionary. We have to fix this. Maybe the future doesn't have 2-day delivery. Maybe it doesn't have same-day delivery. It's like, maybe it doesn't have cars. It's like, okay, well, without 2-day, same day, and cars, I think it's going to be really hard for that single mom to live her day-to-day life because she's got to go get groceries. She's got to take her kids to school and then get to work. She's got to do that all before 8 a.m. she's got to make sure her kids aren't waiting in the cold for an hour before school if she has to get them early on the bus and then go on her own. Like there's a ton of practical things that the Green New Deal missed that I don't think any environmental legislation, like popular environmental legislation, has been addressing. And I think that's the huge problem. And the reason why people keep saying the government should work by and for the people against what I'm saying. It's the reason why the things I'm saying are polling extraordinarily well. And why the Green New Deal and the things in the Green New Deal don't poll very well is because people don't want their cars taken away. They want to be able to move how they please. They want a sustainable solution to do so, but they don't want the price at the pump to go up for 10, 20 years because the supply goes so far down or the cost goes so far up that they can't afford to take their kids to school in the meantime. I mean, it all polls incredibly poorly. And I think if we're serving our people as best as we can, well, we do it by addressing those realities. But I won't have much to say for the rest of this part of the thing because my opinion on the Green New Deal has not changed. It's still bad.
Okay. And next up to Frackle.
So, first and foremost, fully agree with everything that Carr had said, and endless for building on it. I suppose I'll take a moment to kind of address some of those questions, at least from my perspective. First of all, picking up groceries is not the same thing as same day or next day delivery. Like one is going to get groceries, which isn't a delivery, and one is getting a delivery. Now, the folks who are, living in poverty, they're not paying for delivery because that shit is more expensive. It's a luxury. It just is a luxury. They're going down to the store and they're getting their shit. Now, there's a lot of people who live in poverty in the United States who today do not have cars and cannot afford a car, even with all of the excessive subsidizing that we do for oil and for cars and stuff. So this current reality that's so great is only great for people above that poverty line. Whereas a system that is more focused on transit and is more focused on people not choking on their own lungs because we love oil so much is fundamentally more equitable and more humanitarian. I don't see it as wishful thinking, but I do agree that the Green New Deal does not go far enough and is not firm enough on what it's asking for, largely because of, and this is getting into the practical reality of things, there is a manufactured consent towards bias towards cars and towards personal transportation. There's an obsessed propaganda effort towards these things. If we want to put a finger on someone, point to the Koch brothers. Fuck these guys and all of the think tanks and all of the programs that they're constantly running to convince people that, oh, no, you actually do need your car. And here's why. Now, that doesn't mean much to the people who can't afford a car or who are even unhoused, who themselves would benefit from being able to move around in a public transit sort of situation. But yes, that's my thoughts there.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. Finally, Fresh Faces, New Ideas. Round us out here with your opening statement.
Okay. Look, when we're talking about the Green New Deal, it's more of an idea. I think the last I heard, it's a 14-page document. It's not an actual, we don't have a full policy. And the problem is a lot of it is to do with rhetoric against it more than the actual idea. We were against it. So this is going to be a little bit nerdy way of describing it. In one of the What If comics, there's one for I believe it's Annihilation Wave or Civil War. During that point, a character shows up in basically Civil War is currently happening in the comics. The Civil War is happening, but currently on the other side of the universe, there is an invasion that will essentially wipe out every planet everywhere. And one of the heroes who's fighting that shows up at Earth, and he's like, "What the fuck are you guys doing?" He goes, "You're gonna shoot at each other while the planet is ripped out from under you." And that's currently what's happening here. the Republicans and Democrats are attempting to shoot at each other. Now, part of the problem is some of the loudest voices of this are amongst the most stupid. And the perfect point is Marjorie Taylor Greene, as far as I know, has still not read the entirety of the Green New Deal a year later, and is maybe the most popular voice against it. That is one of the issues, is that we're taking a policy for a essentially apocalyptic scenario if we do not deal with it, and we're having it filtered through, can I eat 2 cheeseburgers this month? Can I have my gas guzzler filled up? Like the stakes of this are much higher. Like the problem isn't so much that just like we have 2 problems. One, the Green New Deal policy is similar to like abolish the police. It's more of a slogan at this point than it is like a set of policies that American people can point to and understand. And that may be because they haven't flushed it out. Although at this point, I think it's also political malpractice that they haven't had like significant points that they can do to do this. It's a talking point that they're going to point at. They say the same things over and over again. You can, build your policy to debunk them. And 2, we have to win this culture war where one side or 2% is funded so well that it's considered a 50-50 proposition of whether the planet is going to heat up to the point where we can't breathe. The water levels rise, I believe by 2050, we're talking feet in areas. I know DC, we're talking about at least a foot.
Oh yeah, soil depletion too.
Right.
This is like I mentioned earlier, Australia is like underwater right now. We're playing games while the planet is being ripped out from under us. And it's not, because look, there's just so much easier to do. You can make their arguments in a better way, like the idea of freedom and personal responsibility and individuality. Like these are good arguments you could do to all of these. It's messaging malpractice for like all of this.
Okay. So before we get into the open part of this final topic here, I hope that, Jeb Tan will join us as the lone, I think, voice on the opposition. He said he had nothing else to say. I'm hoping that's not the case.
Oh no,
Please,
I hope he joins us. Please join us.
Yeah,
Please.
so I got a couple more things.
I have to respond.
Before we jump into the open part here, I kind of gave a little bit of malpractice myself by not framing this better. I did an episode on the Green New Deal for my podcast. It's not first of all, just a couple of misnomers. It is 14 pages. It is not a bill. It's literally just like, as they refer to, a framework. It's just like the government should acknowledge that climate change is a problem, the end. And we have to make sure that people who would be affected by this the most have some kind of safety net if we go to do the transition away from fossil fuels. I mean, that's basically in a nutshell what it says. Yeah. So it has no legislation. It's not a piece of legislation, period. Also, another thing I also want to point out here, I think you mentioned polling, Jeb Tan, and I think this kind of goes back to the first thing we talked about, where it was like 74% of people thought that we should have a no-fly zone. I think a part of the reason why the Green New Deal polls so terribly is because the left is absolutely dog shit at messaging anything, which is the reason why Fox News is so dominant. And so anything around the Green New Deal has terrible messaging across the board, which I think maybe we can do a little bit better here today. Because truthfully speaking, there is a lot of benefit, something like this actually being put into place if it ever was moved from a framework into a piece of legislation. But here we currently are. So with all that being said, the last thing I also want to say is, I think another one of the reasons why it does poll so badly is because we're kind of sold a lie in our politics that, the idea of freedom should come above everything, that individual freedoms are more important than collective freedoms, which I think is also exacerbated during the pandemic. So yeah, that's my little piece on it, because I haven't got to speak a whole lot during this panel today. But go ahead, anyone go ahead and just jump in, open panel.
I have some thoughts.
I get the points too. I know Carr's like about to jump right into it.
Oh, I'm going to reach through the screen here in a second, but no, I want Endless to go. I want Endless to go first.
Oh, you want me to go? All right.
Yes. Solidarity.
Bet. So I think that in terms of having the government control transportation and stuff, That's like the only thing that they should exist for, is making things that make life more easy, more accessible to all people. So I don't think it's a far leap to say that while I don't want these oil executives to basically have this death grip on American society, to then say that I would like a certain level of regulation and infrastructure built that in a certain degree can only be done by a federal government. Like I can't, as much as I love to be an anarchist and be on anarchist time, I can't build a high speed loop around the country by myself and with my affinity group, right? Like you're going to need some people, other people's money and other people's help to do that kind of stuff. But
We have to work in the
furthermore,
reality we exist in.
what's that?
We have to work within the reality that we exist in, even if
You're
we
right,
have
facts.
dreams.
Right, yeah. So there's yeah, that on top of I feel like America is unique, and I also disagree that the left is bad at messaging. I feel like that kind of, because there's people that are perfectly acceptable, perfectly reasonable at messaging and damn good at it. Two of those people are on this panel, I believe. The thing that we have in America is, for anybody farther left than Ronald Reagan, there is this like machine built to take the least charitable views of any one of their takes and completely dismiss anything that they have to say behind that. So a lot of the left voices get drowned out because they might say one thing emotionally or something and then get memed on and then completely dismissed for the rest of the time. Whereas the opposite happens on the right, where, like we were saying, the dumbest people end up being the loudest. So it's like, it's really hard to get anything done because we have all of these really just like hard, fast cultural artifacts that exist in America, like this idea of individual liberty at all costs, even if that means other people around you suffer, right? And also white supremacy. But I'll leave it there. we have that problem that's not really a problem in places like China or other places that have lots of that good infrastructure. But
So I would like to first, I did want to address also our moderator's comment. Yeah, there's might be some blind spots in leftist messaging, but the bigger thing to remember that I think everybody forgets is that the right wing has billionaires. Okay, the right wing's media apparatuses has money behind it, and the right wing serves unrestricted, unregulated capital and the pursuit of profits and rent-seeking behavior. So therefore, the right wing will also have petroleum lobbies behind it and petroleum corporations and your Koch brothers and your fracking billionaires and so forth and so on. Right. So what we actually have is an uphill fucking battle on the left, because that's what we're fighting against. It literally wasn't until the age of the internet that some select few left-leaning people could start to maybe speak with the same social impact behind these issues as corporate funded right-wing apparatuses. And even then, your biggest leftist streamers that actually speak on political content pale in comparison to your Ben Shapiro's and your Rubin Reports, because those guys have corporate money behind them. They're going to get ad pushed to millions of eyes regularly. Right. Same thing with Fox News. So and I think this plays into gas prices, and it plays into if we were actually pursuing a Green New Deal, to kind of address some of Jeb's comments. Jeb, is not an attack, but I want to say your comments are lacking some historical context, because historical context would suggest, well, if we take your exemplary single mother, here's what actually did happen 30, 40 years ago. That single mother went to a greengrocer that was walking distance from her home in the city. There were corporate grocery stores, corporate chains even, in every community. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I could drive you around town for 3 hours and show you every site of every closed grocery store that through restrictive covenants, redlining, blockbusting,
Dayton is like
and
that too.
gentrification,
Yep,
Dayton and
right.
Baltimore.
they have killed all of these and replaced them with unhealthy and unaffordable Dollar Generals and Family Dollars. This is an
Yes.
observable phenomenon happening across the world. There's plenty of liquor stores and tobacco in the inner city, and yet greengrocers are really, really, really hard to find, as are pharmacies and health clinics. And
Right.
this is something we had. I'm not talking about something utopian. I'm talking about what we once had. The other thing we once had, we have less public transit infrastructure now than we did. Okay, go to Southern California. I lived in Los Angeles. Drive through downtown Los Angeles and you see the old medians in the road where their electric wire streetcars used to run. They interlaced that entire city. But corporate interests, okay, not the people, corporate interests and corruption took that away from us. That is what that single mother used to use. So when I say that a future with less traffic means less cars, a future with less pollution means less cars, and a future with without 2-day delivery is part of a sustainable future. People had these means in the past. That's what I look to go back to. As an anarchist, I do ultimately want to see the Senate, the Pentagon, the executive branch in its entirety just dissolved. But that's because I know that on the path to that future, we can build up communities to be self-sufficient as they once were. Now, there always has been a rural and urban divide. And yes, a mixture of private vehicle ownership, as well as one of our greatest accomplishments in history in this country that I feel we do ourselves a disservice of not acknowledging, is how much rail we built in this country. We led the world for a century in laying rail across one of the largest unified land masses on the planet. And we can do that again. And it is financially efficient. It is expedient, and it is way faster than it's faster than building new freeways. It's faster than reducing the prices of cars and hoping people get enough money to buy them. And it's even faster than building new buses. And that was what connected rural America to the cities. That's what made us a world leader in cattle crop. That's what made us a world leader in chicken and poultry crop. That's what made us a world leader in wheat. That's what made us a world leader in all of these things, is because we connected the rural to the urban with rail. And we have that capability. It never went away. We have massive mines of iron. We have enough oil coming out of our wells right now to fuel these projects. And we have enough manpower to put them to work to build these. So if I have to have a government as an anarchist, if I have to wake up and swear out loud that the government still exists, then yeah, it needs to be doing more for the people and doing more to make those communities self-sufficient, which should be the right libertarian dream after all, because once you make these communities self-sufficient, once you empower people to have the ability to afford their own meals, to get to and from work without relying on a federal entity because their communities have this infrastructure, then they no longer rely on a federal government. And we have the same goal in that regard. I want there to be less federal government, and in order to get there, we need to build the communities to be sufficient to do it. So that's my thought on kind of everything we've discussed.
Okay, Jeb, I think your name was invoked a few times there.
Yeah, just a little.
Do you want to hop in?
Yeah, I've got a few points because I've been writing down and I've been seeing a lot of through lines. One, the number of dichotomous statements I've heard from everybody are insane. So first, let me get to the first one. Left loses on messaging, but also the obviously dumbest people are the loudest on the right. So the left is losing because they're bad at messaging, but the right is also bad at messaging, but they're still beating the left at messaging. No, the issue is both
Oh,
parties are trying
I
to
didn't say
serve.
that. I'm sorry.
No,
I-
not you, not you.
Okay, I
This is
didn't want to confuse that.
no, yeah, this is just a general thing I keep hearing. The left is losing the messaging battle to the right, and that's the reason why these things are failing. And it's because the right is better at messaging, but also the right is terrible at messaging because they have
The
the
right
dumbest
has
people
power.
ahead.
The right
The
has all
left has
power.
power. The left has a bigger voting base. They have all the big cities, and the corporations support a lot of leftist agendas. That's what I was getting to in a second. So hold
We have
on.
no media
So
control.
the
The
total
left has zero political power.
Hey,
in
no,
the
hold
United
on.
States.
Let
the
him
left
continue
has.
moving
Hold on.
on.
Stop.
Let him finish because like he's
Yeah.
missing what I was saying, but it's fine.
So hold on.
I understand what he's saying.
There's a
that's not what
few
I was saying.
points though. It's not that
Right,
I'm
that's why
missing.
I'm
It's
gonna keep
that I'm
going.
not done.
Yeah.
So first, everything that you guys say about the left is true about the right. Right? The bad at messaging. Both parties are bad at messaging, not because they can't form words, because their solutions suck and people don't like them. And so when they say them, people get mad because they suck and they don't want them. Also, the left is losing some sort of battle because they have less. Someone said the right has billionaires, the left doesn't have billionaires. That's not true at all. The biggest media organizations push policies that are closer to the left than they are to the right. I know what's going to happen in this conversation is what happens in a lot of other conversations where they say, well, the Democrats aren't left, and that's not really as left as I am, and the left is actually this really small. Okay, that's fine. But if we're talking about what the general public sees as left ideas and right ideas, there are billionaires on both sides, and arguably the messaging and the media conglomerates are farther pushed toward the left than they are toward the right. You can see it again and again. And Bezos, big companies, big corporations, they love regulations like higher minimum wages because they push out their competition in the rural communities and further corporatize those communities. Then you also have, at the beginning of the conversation, people were saying, I just want the government to serve the people, right? But then every time I bring up the fact that the people don't actually want what you guys want, you say, well, there's manufactured consent, there's corporate propaganda. You don't want what the people want, and you can admit that. Whatever reason you have for the people not wanting what you want is fine. What you want is for the people to want what you want. Because every time I bring up that they don't, you guys say, well, they don't because there's a manufactured consent car culture by the Koch
White
brothers that have
supremacy.
made everybody want cars. No, the reason people want
What about
cars,
the policies that are popular with the people that aren't passed?
there are
like-
policies there. If you look at nationwide polling among voters, a lot of these policy polls, like they were saying about the Green New Deal, when I said that the Green New Deal polled poorly, he brought up the example of no-fly zones being polled really well when you didn't mention that also included boots on the ground. But once you gave context, it polled worse. A
But
lot
what
of
about ones that
times,
are popular and have context.
Hold on, let
like-
him finish. Let him finish, please.
but there aren't that many that are popular and have context that people vote for. And you know that because they're not voting in the politicians that want to pass them. And when the politicians get into office, they don't pass them because a lot of the constituencies don't want this kind of radical change. They don't want to lose their cars. And also what Frackle was mentioned that I was mentioning, someone going to a grocery store on a bus versus getting groceries delivered. I wasn't saying those are the same thing. I'm saying if you abolish cars in your fantasy world, what does she do? She has to take the groceries on the bus. She's got to get them delivered. She's got to get the groceries somehow, but you're going to be hard pressed to pitch that idea. If you want to put on a poll, would you rather us flesh out an entire city infrastructure so that you take public transit and don't have a car, but you have to take your groceries on that car? And we also don't want Amazon using all this gas to deliver things to your house. So you've got to go and take the bus and bring your groceries on the bus. Or would you rather just have a car where you can drive to the store, load your groceries in your car and drive home? They're going to say they want to drive their car home. That's the reason why 86% of people commute with a car right now. More people than that have access to public transport. People like cars. You guys have even admitted people like cars. You've just said it's because of some manufactured consent or some conspiratorial propaganda pushed by the Koch brothers.
I have to.
I
cut
have
you
to
off.
as well. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
hold
that's
on.
okay.
First,
Hold on, everyone.
But hold on, I
everyone.
had like a total of
Okay.
15 minutes of statement after
Okay.
statement against what I'm saying. But people want to have cars. That's a huge market thing that everybody recognizes in the green energy market. That's why one of the first subsidized industries in green energy was electric cars. It was incredibly heavily subsidized to the point where electric cars would not exist the way that they do today without the heavy subsidies, because even right now, you could get up to $7,500 in a straight cash tax credit for buying an electric car. they were heavily subsidized. And the reason why they are is because to push people to green energy, you're not going to just be able to say, hey, we're going to take your cars away, because people like having the freedom to move about as they please. And we also have a massive landmass full of people who are used to being able to move about how they please all across the country if they want to on a whim, and they want to maintain their ability to do so. And you're talking about like this fringe minority of people who don't have a car and take their groceries on the bus. That's not a huge portion of people. And I guarantee the people who have to do that don't want to have to do that. Like you said, it's because they can't afford a car. It's not because they don't want to have a car. It's because they can't afford one. So you're pushing all these things that have all these subtle caveats. Well, yeah, it's going to hurt for a couple of years. Okay, well, what does it's going to hurt for a couple of years look like? It looks like them not being able to afford to get to work and to school for a very long time, almost a generational amount of time. You're talking about fucking on the shortest end, maybe 5 years, but you're looking more likely at 10 to 20 years to build out all this stuff you guys are talking about. And because we're talking about a web network connecting the entire country, all of the rural communities by rail or by bus or however you want to do it, that's going to take decades. And you're talking about moving money away, which you're admitting is propping up the oil industry and making gas criminally undervalued, meaning that it's going to get criminally overvalued in the meantime. What's your solution for those few years it's going to hurt, which could literally leave people to their entire livelihood going away? They can't get to work, can't get their kids to school, can't get their groceries, and they can't get them delivered, apparently, even though that's not this niche thing. A lot of poor people have Amazon Prime. And I live in Southern California, you can get groceries delivered in most metro areas with Amazon Fresh for free with Amazon Prime. Literally the same price it is at the grocery store. You put it in on Amazon, they send it to your house for free in 2 hours. It's not this weird fringe thing.
All right.
So you guys can hit that point.
can I please
really
respond?
quickly. Yes, you will. You will be able to rebuttal. First, I just was informed that we have someone who has a hard out. So Daniel, will you just go ahead and give us a quick, I guess, closing and let everyone know where they can find you at outside of here? I know that you have to get going. So thank you for coming on the panel today.
I do apologize. I know everybody is chomping at the bit to reply. So thank you very much for your patience and your time. So I would like to say that a very good example of the manufactured consent is where there are things that we've been convinced of and where we go against our own interests that we don't even know. And I have a very perfect example of that. And I'll try and keep this brief for me and for everybody. There's a woman I was talking to, and we were talking about the gas tax thing that I was mentioning earlier, where I was trying to find a way to remove that from the burden being on consumers and shift that onto the corporations that have the trucks. And she said, well, no, I have a lot of family members that are truckers, and they carry a lot of unnecessary burden already with the taxes, the fees, the registration of their vehicles and all of that. And she says, so she's not for that. And I said, well, I clarified, well, no, not the independent truckers. We would put that on the corporations that contract them, like Amazon and Walmart. And as soon as I said Walmart, she was like, nope, I am done talking to you. She said, I worked at Walmart for a year, and even though I no longer work there, I don't agree with what you're saying, and I'm done. So at the expense of her family members that are being burdened, she would still rather defend Walmart. And so I can't explain why this dichotomy exists, this cognitive dissonance exists in people's minds. And so I can't say that it's all propaganda and it's all manufactured consent, because Jeb, you're also right. There is something to the comfort and convenience and security of having your own vehicle. And so I think that there's a both and that needs to happen. I think that just like with the gun argument, where when you tell people you're going to take their guns versus saying, hey, let's craft better legislation, there's a different argument. And so yes, if you tell people you're going to take their vehicles away, they're going to fight you on that. But if we bridge that gap and if we make sure there are things, because I live in a community where there are a lot of people where I see we have mothers, single mothers, 4 kids in tow. There's not even taking the bus. They're walking with 2 strollers to go get their groceries. And so they would prefer to have the bus. So yes, there are some people who will still get delivery. And like, so here our local grocery stores, Ralph's will do deliveries. And so you don't even have to have an Amazon thing. And so I think that where we go to the extreme of, I'm going to take your car, you can do nothing but walk or take the bus. have the incentives to buy an electric vehicle, decrease the costs even more, increase the production, make them more affordable and more efficient, but also lay more local infrastructure so that there are buses that they can take. And also, I do like the points that were made earlier about missing the local grocers. There's within walking distance 3 grocery stores almost in my local area, 2 of which have closed, right? Because they've been squeezed out by Ralph's and the bigger competitors that have bigger contracts. The few local grocery stores that do exist, their products, it's a Mexican grocery store. And so the Mexican products are cheaper, they're able to get them, but a box of Kraft costs $7 for macaroni and cheese because they aren't a big conglomerate that can get a big contract with Kraft. So we need to increase their ability to buy at a more affordable rate so that they can have more general products. So I think this is a very big problem where it's not just a one size fits all. And I think that empowering our local communities and our local governments and municipalities to increase their infrastructure, not only with buses, but the local grocery stores, where here it's even in our small community. I live in a small city called Port Hueneme that only exists because the Navy bought the port for World War II. It's a very small community, and even here, they will favor and prioritize Ralph's and corporate grocery stores over supporting the local communities, where they make it 10 times harder for a small business to start than for a big corporation to roll into town. And so those are the ways that we can kind of flip all of this. We need to decrease the cost and increase the incentives for even poor and working class people to be able to afford electric vehicles, while also increasing the infrastructure so that they don't have to rely on one or the other. Because what if even they have a car and then it breaks down? They would then be able to rely on the bus and still get to work. So it's a both and. We can do all of these things. And then also, like I said, empower local communities to have grocery stores, meat markets, and ways to get their groceries and even their clothes, right? Clothing stores. Now, where do you go? You have to go to Target or Walmart or all of these places. One last point. All of these things will build jobs, like laying rail. With the Green New Deal, we need to combine anything that does that with a jobs guarantee where we can put our unemployed back to work if they want to, by rebuilding our communities, laying down rail, building bus lines, building the buses, and working in our local grocery stores where they've been shut down. Thank you, everybody, for your time and all of your insight. I look forward to following up on the rest of this conversation and all of the awesome topics that you bring up. This has been a wonderful, engaging conversation. I've taken lots of notes. Look forward to seeing some of these ideas in California legislation in the future. And I look forward to not only watching, but coming back to these. Anybody in California or around the country and the world that liked what you had to see, my social media right there, @Daniel4VC for Twitter, Instagram, all of the socials, even Facebook. And then votefordaniel.com is my website, nonpartisan, non-corporate funded, trying to find tangible solutions to relieve the burden and the excessive pressure on the working class, who disproportionately pay the most to keep our economy and our infrastructure running, while the corporations that use them the most pay the least. So thank you so very much for your time. I appreciate you all. Keep the ideas going. This is how we engage, we grow, and we learn, is through these dialogues. So thank you, Desmond, for creating this platform. Everybody who's not, go subscribe to Independent Thought and follow him on all his social medias as well. And everybody here, so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank you,
it. Thank you
Daniel.
for being here, Daniel. All right, so we are going to kick it over really quickly before we go. We're going to go to No Justice, then Fresh Faces, then Frackle. Really quickly, though, I want to just somewhat clarify what I was talking about before when I mentioned that the left was bad at messaging. I wasn't meaning anybody who has like a leftist perspective. I meant more or less people who have big media platforms. When I'm thinking of about like Fox News versus CNN or whereabouts. And when I think about it, it's more along the lines of like 3 things in particular. When we talk about like maybe like defund the police, or what socialism is, or what the Green New Deal is, if you ask the average person, you know, what those 3 things are, more chances than not, they're probably going to respond to whatever the right critique is, because the right seems to be able to essentially create better narratives throughout our country than the left is when it comes to people who are pretty consistently in the media again. But that's basically what I was trying to say about that when it comes to those 3 things. Because again, I mean, how long we've been talking about like defund the police for, and like still people think it actually means abolish the police versus actually kind of, you know, just like reorganizing how we, you know, set budgets for police in local municipalities. But
Abolish
anyway,
the police, though, really.
yeah,
See,
but
but that's the thing, though, is
Yeah, you
because the
took a little
original
time off.
slogan was abolish, and a lot of people do mean it. That's the reason why.
Oh,
people
I
say
do
it.
mean it. I
Because it's not
absolutely
bad.
mean it.
It's not
Oh,
bad
I 100%
messaging.
mean
It's
it.
bad. Or it's not. Sorry, I'll go away from good and bad. It's not messaging they don't like. It's legitimate ideas that they don't like. Like there are
Right.
people in poor communities who are like, I feel like they kind of help keep me safe, and people are like, no, abolish them, and so they say, okay, no, and they say defund them, and they're like, well, I don't know if I even want to do that because I still have police officers using, 12-year-old plate carriers. Like, I
Right.
don't know if I want that. So
so I don't want to take the conversation down that rabbit hole just yet. We can have a whole different panel for that.
Please do.
Oh
and,
boy.
and we can.
Please do.
So, but I was just that's the messaging that I was particularly like referring to. But please, no justice, jump in and go ahead first.
Okay, so there's quite a lot of points to respond to, so I'll try and make it as short and pithy as I possibly can. First of all, with regards to where the left lies within the United States and who supports them and where. So the idea that something like the Green New Deal was something that was being given support by billionaires and by News Corp, by the left-leaning media is just nonsense. There were like not even the third wayers or the social democrats within the Democratic Party were given any kind of airtime or support by places like CNN and MSNBC, which are the legacy media that support the liberal left in the United States, relative to the rest of the political landscape in that country, right? I mean, so much so that even the own audience in MSNBC had to go on on the panels and say, look, you're treating Bernie Sanders unfairly. Now, obviously, he calls himself a Dem sock, but really he's at most a sock Dem, and the vast majority of his policy platform is just the third way, as far as I'm concerned. But regardless, I don't think there was any actual corporate media support for any of the left's policies throughout the entirety of the election cycle. Again, I've not been following American politics pre-Obama, so I couldn't really comment more on that in regards to the media's ability to be able to manipulate the discourse in the country, but whatever, that's a story for another time. Second of all, when we talk about for the people, or we talk about how the government is acting, what we're talking about is the material interests of specific classes of people who share such material interests, right? And whether the government is acting in that regard. And I'm not really so bothered about how issues are polling. I'm mostly regarding which members of the government are acting with certain classes of people in mind, with how they're constructing their policy platforms. Sure, I understand specific policies may not poll well because people are have certain desires that they have with which to keep, but that's may not align with what their material interest is as a class or as a demographic of people. Third of all, when we're talking about how, say, for example, plenty of people in America like cars and they would like to have a car. I mean, the reason why everyone in America needs a car is because in the early 20th century, the car lobby has forced urban planners to be able to create cities in which all of the public areas are being reserved for roads with which that you need to be able to have cars to travel on. The city centers, which should be places of congregation, of pedestrianized areas where people can gather and which have public transport links to be able to give people the access to them, they never existed because of the way in which the lobbying, the way in which the cultural hegemony that capital engenders within those systems to be able to self-replicate, made sure that those things did not happen, because otherwise there would be no profits with which to move forward for those particular lobbyists, right? That's why people's incentive structures are set up in such a way that they have to desire or engenders the desire for certain things, which again may not be within their material interests. It's not just manufactured consent, it's also the cultural hegemony that comes from the self-replication within capitalism. Again, obviously I understand that that's a specific take that I have, that's specific to my ideology, so I understand why people might disagree with that, but that's where we're coming from when we say these things.
All right. I also want to see Fresh Faces and Frackle. You guys both got cut off by me earlier. Apologies. Fresh Faces, go ahead and go first.
Yeah, I don't really have a lot. I'm sure Frackle will have a whole lot of extra excellent points. But look, when I talk about the messaging, it's a lot to do with the fact that the policies that the left seems to be pushing can't be very neatly kind of explained in their entirety in little slogans. It's a lot easier to say socialism bad or defund the police than it is to explain policy. So when I refer to the loudest voices being the dumbest, it is that Marjorie Taylor Greene is the face of the Republican Party as the #1 fundraiser in the country for them. Like, I don't know if there has been a less intelligent person in Congress than her at any point. And now you've said you don't believe in the party, but I'm being clear about this. Like the way that things are shown by the media, like culturally, they're left because the culture wars don't really affect the bottom line of the people in power, like whether trans people have rights or not, whether gay people have rights or not, whether minorities have rights or not, doesn't really affect Coca-Cola. But when we're talking about policies, when we're talking about what Biden was doing in Build Back Better as too expensive, when we've already going to have spent more than the entirety of that on the military in these 2 years versus a 10-year program. The fact that there is zero coverage in mainstream media of the fact that since January, 3.7 million children have fallen back into poverty because of the removal of the child tax credit. And 100% of the Republican Party in Congress and the Senate is for that, is things that we don't know. So like leftist media, whatever the existence of it, like even when you talk about the left networks, like the people who were fired for their coverage of the Democratic conventions were on the left. They were Chris Matthews. It was him and Chuck Todd were the ones who were so insane in their coverage of how it was covered. Like Fox is in a totally different world that they don't really face the same type of consequences. But the mainstream, like the lifeblood when you get your information, and this is also the problem, like polling and stuff is very difficult because you can just word things differently. But like when we talk about policies that would be positive for the people, the one I think of most obviously, 93%, something like 93% of Americans support Medicare negotiating drug prices. I'm in New York and I've seen the commercials against it and they're fucking terrible. Like they're laughably bad. And it's 93% report, but if you ask people about it, they'll tell you that they're against it. Like it is manufactured consent for a right-leaning thing. Like what we consider left-leaning in this country is at best center.
Okay, Freckle, you want to go ahead and jump back in?
Sure. So yeah, first and foremost, has to reiterate what is called the left in at least the media landscape in the United States. It's just neoliberalism. The left doesn't really have a voice. That said, let's talk about public transit again. Okay, so first and foremost, people want the freedom to drive a car. Okay, that's fine if it's a luxury. The problem is our public transit system is so bad in the United States. And there are other countries like this, but especially the United States, Justice touched on this, or no Justice touched on this, that it's not actually a luxury item. It's not an option for the majority of Americans. It's essential if you want to be able to work your job and such. You don't really have other options to not only to do your job, but also to get groceries, to travel, to do anything that you need to do in your day-to-day life that isn't in your house. As far as public support, 66% of Americans believe that their immediate community would benefit from expanding public transit. Only 25% disagree. If they expand their view to the United States as a whole, that number jumps to 77% believe that the United States would benefit from a expanded public transit network. Now, these are the polling numbers. Policy does not reflect the polling numbers. Policy reflects the Koch brothers' interests in suppressing public transit infrastructure. You mentioned that we should just keep on doing pilot studies like in Minnesota. And you're correct, that was a pilot study. And as a result of that, they've decided, despite the fact that it shows a return on investment and despite the fact that it polls very well, they're not going to, at this time, expand that infrastructure. And that is a political decision. It does not reflect the actual views of that community, of the people of that state. So these are a couple different things. First, it's not just a freedom, it's not just a choice, it's actually an essential item for most adults. Second, it is an essential item because we fail again and again to actually expand our public transit system. You can look at You can look at the public transit network of any urban area in the United States and compare it to the equivalent coverage of most European urban areas and even Canadian ones. And the disparity is astounding. And then let's get into just the rail as freight thing, because even if you don't touch people driving, even if you just focus on trucks, just removing the trucks from the road and putting them on the rails as like a starting point before you expand it to moving passengers, the AADT of 18 wheelers is massive in this country, and it is an extreme consumer of not only gasoline but also asphalt and stuff. The Endless mentioned very early on about the resilience of rail, and that can't be overstated. The amount that is spent maintaining roadways is massive in this country. It costs over $1 million to resurface a single mile of highway, and we have to resurface a lot. So less asphalt that we need means less maintenance costs. It means, if we can get less cars on the road, it means less gasoline, less people dying of being choked out, and also less accidents. Like that, let's not understate the absolute travesty that is people dying in car wrecks. I mentioned the rate of people dying of just secondary health effects from gasoline, but that addiction to cars and the fact that we don't have more of a public transit, less traffic centered model means our rate of accidents is one of the highest in the world, of developed nations and stuff. So yeah, there's a lot of arguments for it. That's where I'm at.
All right, I'm going to jump in really quickly and let everyone know that we got about 10 minutes left. So if anyone wants to make their final statement on this topic, please feel free to jump in any particular order.
I can just go last, so that way, if anybody has anything more to say about the points I made, I can just respond to all at once.
All right. So, Car, Endless, you guys haven't talked for a little bit. You want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll keep it brief to close on everything. It's I mainly said my piece and addressed what I wanted to address to Jeb's arguments, and just thank you, Jeb, for engaging in good faith this whole time.
Mm-hmm.
I really do appreciate that. I don't get to talk to too many right wingers who do that, or right leaning individuals who do that. So I do appreciate that. And I feel like you've at least been willing to listen to what we've had to say here today. So that's appreciated. Basically, I'm a big believer in freedom myself, to everyone else. I will never breathe a word about abolishing cars. I want to see a reduction in the amount of cars, and I want to see the infrastructure necessary for people to do that. To bring it back to the conversation about gas prices, one way for us to kind of future-proof against the price shocks that comes from these gas prices comes back to what we're talking about with public transit. Yes, we are spending a lot of taxpayer dollars subsidizing the oil industry to keep the price low. We probably shouldn't be doing that. And yes, when we start doing that, or start ramping that down, because we don't do anything overnight. I don't want anyone to think that I'm suggesting some nightmare scenario when we do things overnight. It's not how it works. I don't think that one day I just turn off all the lights at the White House and say, oh, no more executive branch, and turn off all the lights at the Pentagon and the Capitol building and say, okay, federal government's done, guys, pack it in and go home. No, we have steps. We do things with incremental steps. So as we ratchet that down and put money towards green energy. We recognize that, yeah, there are people in this country who still need to use gasoline or diesel. There's people who need to use petrol. There's people in rural areas who operate equipment on their property and surrounding land. So there's people who drive trucks on their farms. There's people who drive tractors. There's people who live in some areas where they need a car to get to and from. It's not necessarily expedient or easy to do for them to take a train to go, say, get groceries and things like that. That's why I'm not really for abolishing cars. What I'm for is helping the majority of car owners who are also clustered around our population centers, just like the majority of our people and the majority of the places where public transit would benefit the most, taking away the hard requirement to own a car and be subjected to those price shocks, make it that luxury that it should be and that it once was, because our cities were not always built this way. And that's a big thing for me, is historical context. It wasn't always this way. And we've been taught that this is the only way to do it. It wasn't the only way to do it. We've done it different ways in the past, effectively too. So that's the main thing I want people to take from it, is that we can slowly but effectively make these changes so that if less people are reliant on cars, then the price fluctuations of gasoline, or for that matter, gasoline at the pump, being priced what it actually should be, given true supply and demand, not with somewhat federal meddling. If they're not going to go all in and nationalize our oil reserves in their entirety, then it's not as big of a deal to the average worker, so that I don't have that exemplary single mother paying $15 at the pump, or $5 at the pump, or $4 at the pump. She's got other ways to get done what she needs to get done. I'll just make it easy and make this my closing statement. Thanks for flying with me today, everybody. My name is Carr. I am a Black anarchist based in the Midwest. I make YouTube videos about political commentary. Sometimes I jump on stream. I also like video games, dogs, guns, and whiskey. So please come check me out. Most of my videos are pretty bite-sized in length. I recently made one about why international sporting events are bad, Super Bowl, World Cup, and Olympics, and why you should protest it if your city wants to host it. So come check me out, and thank you, Desmond and Independent Thought, for having me.
Absolutely.
Say you don't want any more cars, yet you call yourself Car.
Interesting. It works out that way, and it's hard to keep up. So I just tell people that I named myself after the rifle, the Car Arms 98 instead.
Hey.
All right. So who wants to go next with their closing?
I'll go.
Okay.
Just because I don't want to have to follow Frackle and Carr. Yeah, to put it succinctly, I agree with everything Carr said. I've probably talked about abolishing cars and stuff before, but just going off. But I agree, cars should be luxury items. The infrastructure should be built up as far as public transit is concerned, both in terms of freight and just personal getting from point A to point B. Not only should it be like that, at one point it was like that. Other countries are like that. They're using my tax dollars to specifically make it not like that, and I would like them to not do that. The only difference between this country and other countries is that we don't have a racially homogenous society. There's a little bit of corporate greed, a little bit of white supremacy. You mix that together and you end up with a society that intentionally makes things extremely shitty to do anything for the poor, whether that's through barriers in terms of public transit being fucky or cars being unreasonably priced, gas being gouged, gas prices being gouged, so on and so forth. But I guess that would be the long and short for me. I'm in the cemetery. I'm also a Black anarchist. That's the majority of what my political content focuses on: police abolition, government abolition, and solidarity. I do a lot of stuff observing like Black Panthers and stuff. And I play video games. You can catch me at endlesscemetery.com, where I stream on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Trovo, and like everywhere else. I'm also on Twitter. I'm on SoundCloud and stuff too. I also co-host a podcast called the Bolsheviks Podcast. That's BALTSHEVIKS. We talk about Baltimore stuff, we talk about commie stuff, and we talk about Baltimore commie stuff. So, yeah. Thanks
All right.
everyone for having me. And yeah.
Go give the podcast a 5-star review on Apple, everyone. Stop playing games. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
No Justice, you are next.
So actually, I don't think that cars should specifically be a luxury item. I think everyone should be able to have access to one should they want one. I just think that we should be having things in place to make sure that these things are as environmentally friendly as possible, that our cities are planned and built for pedestrians and for public transport, and not with roads going straight through the central business district. I think that we should have public transport that is available and is efficient enough to be an alternative for cars, so that people would want to use the public transport instead of using their car, right? That's a big thing. Once you create the system, the infrastructure that is there that usurps the previous model that is less efficient, that will, as long as as long as the right people are in charge of being able to produce that, that will change people's behaviors accordingly. If it's cheaper and more efficient and faster, especially if it's intercity rail, which is definitely faster than driving, then it will. And if it's more affordable and more convenient, people will use it, right? Whereas obviously there are some things you just need a car for. So I think that should be something that the working class should just have access to, just at a lower level than we do now, and with far more environmentally friendly. But that's a story for another time. Anyway, I am No Justice MTG, or No Justice, what I like to be called, but that's the channel name. That channel name just there. You can also find me on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, where I upload all of my stuff, bits and pieces, stream segments, little clips, also all those different bits of platforms, or shit posts is most of what I do on Twitter. And I just stream a couple of times a week talking about British political issues from a Marxist standpoint. And thank you very much, everyone, for joining me on the panel today, especially Jeb for being the lone conservative on the panel. And thank you very much, Desmond, for putting it all together as well.
Of course. Jeb, you said you wanted to go last, correct? Yeah. Okay. So Fresh Faces, New Ideas. Why don't you go ahead and give us your closing next?
Look, this was about the Green New Deal. The policy as it is, it doesn't really exist, and if it doesn't have teeth, it's an issue. Again, I stand by my statement. A lot of the issues that we're facing with policies like this is we're shooting at each other while the planet is pulled out from underneath us. It's mostly a messaging issue, and unfortunately, you have to word things very simply for the American people in a way that they can understand. And then you can't look at a policy that is vast and covers a whole lot of issues and then cherry pick a couple little scenarios. Just for example, I think the mother having to get her groceries is a secondary issue that we could deal with after we know that the planet isn't going to be uninhabitable for those kids to exist in the first place. That's a lot of how I look at the climate issues. I am less worried about the immediate uncomfortability of me being able to order a shirt within 48 hours than I am for not having to swim out of my house every day.
All right. Thank you so much. Frackle, go ahead and give us your closing statement next.
Sure. So I want to do this in part to answer a question that I didn't really answer before. So that question was, how do we get to this, fantasy version, policy wise or what have you? And it does start by shifting where we're investing. So 2020, 5.9 trillion globally was spent subsidizing fossil fuel. That's about 6.5% of the global GDP. That's not just in the United States, but something like 700 billion of that was from the United States. Start transitioning that. Doesn't have to be all at once, but set where you say every year we're going to reduce the amount that we're throwing at this. We're going to start investing it in these other areas. That's how you transition. Now, at least in the capitalist weird structure that we are stuck with at the moment. Because the infrastructure will follow the money. That's where we're currently hemorrhaging tax dollars. If we change to where we're spending it in a better way, the infrastructure will manifest. And if you do it in if you start stepping it down and start shifting that money over time, it won't be as painful. You can do this in tandem with, releasing some of those reserves or whatever, and using the sale of those reserves to help finance things as well. That's great. But the reality is, this is all achievable. This is all things that have been talked about, and there actually are very detailed policy prescriptions, especially on how to build and realize a effective public transit system for several decades. And if anyone is interested, I am happy to talk about that off stream. My background for 20 years has been public or transportation planning specifically in the state of Florida, but it applies pretty broadly to the United States. A lot of the same issues exist across states. Can find me on youtube.com/Frackle. And yeah, I do video essays and stuff. I stream sometimes on Twitch TV/Frackle, but I'm going to be moving more towards YouTube because I get a bit long-winded and folks just don't I don't think that the live format is as suitable for me.
All right, thank you so much. And last but not least, our lone conservative, Jeb Tan. Go ahead and give us your closing statement for today.
Yeah, so basically, general closing statement for this issue, obviously, ban Russian oil. I think we all agreed on. I think we should do that. I think we should increase domestic output however we need to in the meantime to ease pressures at the pump. As far as responses to what other people have said that I haven't already responded to, I've done this research before because people have talked about it to me before that, cars are only popular in America because our cities were built with no places for people to walk around. It's just not true. We have a lot of walkable cities. Cities are required to have sidewalks around pretty much everything. Crosswalks, sidewalks. They have a lot of places for congregation. Even our biggest cities, they're known for their parks, their town centers, their downtown areas, all of which have places for congregation. And if you talk about some insidious design of roads being near big populated areas that should be walkable, I think it's better. And I think a lot of people have asked, like the convenience of being able to drive straight to work, park at work, walk a minute into the building and a minute out so they can get back in their car and leave. The polls for public transit, I don't disagree that people think generally that they could use an extra bus line or train line or two around where they live. And that's pretty much what the polls reflect. The issue is using those polls to then say they are for a complete shift away from cars toward public transit for the entirety of the country, and a massive overhaul of government expenditure and increase of government expenditure, because you would need a massive increase in order to create something like that, is a little... It's not representative of what those polls suggest. And moving freight from trucks to rails is actually something I super agree with. I think we should do that far before we should invest in a ton of crazy expensive lithium batteries that are going to all die in 10 years for new electric semis. I'm pretty pro keeping freight largely on the rails. And I think it would help for traffic and like you said, road upkeep as well. Freight is a lot easier to do that with because you could at least limit the distance the trucks have to move, and a lot of the freight goes to the same places. And as far as just general increase in public transit, I don't think that's bad. I think communities that vote for more public transit should get it. I think that governments should be more open to opening up votes for that kind of thing, but I do think they should be honest in that as to if you're going to move the investment from something else, how that's going to affect the price of the pump, how that's going to affect their ability to take themselves places with their own personal vehicles. And I think that there's been a lot of effort to not be honest with the public on votes regarding those sorts of things. Like Daniel was saying with the California gas tax, we were told it was going to be used on fixing roads and infrastructure. and $0 of it was used for that. In fact, it was used to be reinvested into green energy programs, which was not what was on the ballot for it to be used for. And now that there's $1.9 trillion in federal funding to improve infrastructure, there are no talks about repealing that gas tax or redistributing it in some way to affect corporations more than people, even though its stated purpose is now taken care of by federal funds that are going to be available. So I think that if these are truly popular sentiments among the majority of the country, that localities should be more open to putting them to a vote and allowing the people to prove that. But I haven't seen that shake out, even in California, which is a very liberal place that, you know, spends a ton on gas, more than most other states. Even here, people still seem to be pretty locked into having their cars. They like having their cars. And I think that electric cars are a much better way, or e-fuel. That's a whole other thing. I think e-fuel is the best way for cars to move forward and keep the environment safe while people still retain their individual right to travel as they please.
All right. And where can everyone find you at?
Jebtan RIP on Twitter, Jebtan at Twitch, though I don't stream too often. So I'm just sort of building the Twitter following right now and hopping on panels when I can.
All right. Thank you everyone for being on the panel today. As I told everyone last week, if you are on the panel today, you have an open invitation to come back onto the panel in the future. Thank you to all my panelists for being here. It's much appreciated, you guys sitting with me for what is like, 3 hours now? So long conversation, but thank you all for being here. Thank you to all the listeners who are watching across Twitch and eventually in the future on YouTube. Please subscribe to the podcast, Independent Thought, and to the YouTube channel. We'll be doing more of these panels in the future. So yeah, thank you everyone again, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you guys.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.